what I've tried to do here is I have only noted down what I thought is going to be very, very relevant, very, very important directly from the exam perspective. When you look at this classification, it does not really tell you much about what all is included in services, because there are roughly around 15 subsectors within the services sector itself. Any person on the road, what makes a worker productive? They are definitely going to say these three, 100%, and they're not wrong. So in terms of the contribution of services to the GDP, in terms of contribution of services to the employment, in terms of contribution to services, in terms of exports, everything has been increasing. And look at their contribution to employment. Employment high, contribution to GDP not as high, that means low productivity. It has also led to early warning alerts, जो आपको आते होंगे आजकल मैसेज से पहले. आपने नोटिस किया होगा कई बार कि earthquake आ गया या फिर winds तेज होने वाली हैं. That is basically C-DOT doing it. Why was agriculture not productive? Because capex in agriculture has suffered. More specifically, public investment in agriculture has suffered. Why? Because you spend too much towards subsidies. For those of you who are wondering who is this waiter-looking guy, my name is Ranchan, and I'm here to take 2 chapters on economic survey. 2 very, very important chapters. One will be with respect to services, and the other one is with respect to agriculture. Now, I know most of you have come here because you're probably a little anxious about what is going to be asked in the prelims examination. First thing has to be abundantly clear. The thing which has to be abundantly clear for you is that the requirement of economic survey is not only to find out schemes, only to find out the names of institutions which may be asked in a prelims examination. This economic survey is equally, if not more important for the mains examination. So for you, the objective will be twofold. You are expected to know something about the Indian economy, and you are going to basically update your understanding, because this survey is a document which presents to you what has happened to the state of Indian economy since the last year. It is going to be covering certain themes with respect to agriculture, with respect to services also, which are important from the economy perspective. Surveys are not meant to be written for UPSC aspirants. Now, UPSC aspirants require the survey because questions are asked from the survey directly, but it's not written for you. It is written for a person who is generally an enthusiast and generally very curious about the state of the Indian economy. So the expectation that the author of the survey has is that some person who's going to be interested in the economic survey will also be economically literate. Right? You should know something before you pick up on the economic survey. Unfortunately, what happens is, because you are aspirants and of course you want to clear this examination, you are only looking at it from the perspective of, oh, let me find some schemes, let me find some names of institutions which may be asked. That is not incorrect an approach. Of course, you have to look for what has been the hotspot in the economic survey, because that's a high likelihood of questions being asked straight up. But the broader understanding of services sector and agriculture sector has to be updated, right? So for those who have come here only for us to identify which questions will be asked in prelims, right, that part will be dealt later on in the lecture. How I have tried to design this lecture is that I'm going to be first building for you the context of the sector, its role, its importance for India, right? And then we are going to be, in the light of that understanding, we are going to be seeing what did the economic survey mention this year, right? Now, 2 important services, 2 important sectors which you have to cover here is agriculture and also services. Very, very important. Now, we will start with, first we'll start with services. And from services, we'll move to agriculture. The broader objective would be to update your understanding across both of these, and then to find certain key schemes, certain institutions, some relevant data points from which questions may be asked directly in prelims. This is more important from your mains perspective, and this is more important from your prelims perspective. For us to reach here, we will have to do this. And you will see, if you have a decent understanding of this role and importance of the sector, it will be a cakewalk for you to just walk through what the economic survey has mentioned this year. We'll start with services first. Now, look at the chapter on services. What I've tried to do here is I have only noted down what I thought is going to be very, very relevant, very, very important directly from the exam perspective. The survey begins by talking about, firstly, by talking about this part, which is what is the sectoral contribution of services to GDP. It gives you a comparative analysis in terms of how services are important across the globe before it comes down to how much services are meaningful and important to the Indian economy. Now, first thing first, I would want you to know what services include, right? Because we are Indians, and what we know about services sector in India is like it comprises roughly around 55% of our GDP. Significant proportion of our exports come from services itself. And when we think services, we're basically thinking about IT-enabled services. First thing is, look at what services include. Now, normally, services are classified across these 5 categories. These will include trade, repair and maintenance, hotels and restaurants, hospitality, transport, storage, communication, and services related to broadcasting, financial services, which is the banking and the financial services industry, real estate, ownership of dwelling and professional services, public administration, and other services. When you look at this classification, it does not really tell you much about what all is included in services, because there are roughly around 15 subsectors within the services sector itself. A better classification for you to know would be this, which is what are the various services subsectors. Computer and information services, then you have professional, scientific, and other business services. Now remember, when you're talking about computer and information services, this is not where software development is going to be. Software development is going to be here, other business services. If they have not categorized it here itself. Computer and information services basically means about the storage, processing of information over computers and networks, only that. The software all part gets here. What are professional services? Professional services are such services which require you to have a professional degree before you give this service to any other person. For example, lawyers, accountants, engineers, architects. Right? These are professional services. Now, scientific services will include R&D. Scientific services will also include quality control. You have transportation as a sector, then you have travel as a sector. Now remember, when you're talking about transportation, you're primarily talking about freight movement. And when you're talking about travel, here you're including the hospitality industry. Now you have trade and repair, then you have postal and courier services, financial services, telecommunications, insurance and pension services, audiovisual and related services, education, healthcare, personal, cultural and recreational services, others, and then government, or you would say government included services. It's a very, very diverse sector. So whenever you are thinking about services, please keep all of these things in mind. We'll be talking about education, health, everything included. Don't focus only and only on IT, right? It's a very, very complicated, very heterogeneous sector. Now, let's begin. First, it says the sectoral contribution to GDP across the world of the services sector is somewhere around, the economic survey mentions 62%. Right? This is the data that I have culled out from previous reports also. Up till last year, the number was somewhere between 53 to 67%. This has been the increase in the sectoral contribution from 1970 to 2021. The survey mentions this contributes roughly around 62% of the global GDP. That means by value addition terms, or in terms of the value of total output, or in terms of how much do services contribute across the globe, services are the dominant sector. 62% of global GDP is contributed by services as a sector. That is the first thing. That means it is important not just for India, it is important across the globe. In fact, far more important for the richer countries across the world compared to how important it is for India itself. Right? Even for richer countries, you will find that the numbers would even be upwards of 70% in terms of contribution to GDP by the service sector alone. Now, have services always been important to the global economy? Have they always been important to the wealthy countries of the world? Have they always been? Right? When you look at these graphs, right, you look something like this. You will find that services, 58.7 trillion out of a world economy of roughly around 100 trillion. Right? This has been the contribution. Has it always been the case? Not necessarily. In fact, when you look at this chart itself, this chart hides so much that you should already know before you read the economic survey, right? How important services are as a sector towards global GDP, right? In fact, if you look at high income countries, if I could show you, see, the OECD countries, high income countries, right? It is greater than, or you'll say it's very close to 70% of the total GDP, right? For low income countries, developing countries, and for middle income developing countries, we are going to be somewhere here, right? It is somewhere closer to around 50% of our GDP. It is very, very important to the rich countries of the world too. Now, why is it important to the rich countries of the world? Why do services matter, right? Now, firstly, we need to understand what is a rich country. And mind you, don't skip this analysis. If you know this analysis, after that, understanding services as a sector, a cakewalk. Firstly, what would be a rich country? Productive capacity is much higher, or to put very simply, where people make more incomes. In a rich country, people make more incomes compared to what happens in middle income countries, developing countries, poorer countries. They make more incomes. Now, since income is what you get from contributing your factors of production to the production process, that means more incomes should come from more production. Remember, if there is, this is the most basic thing about macroeconomics. If there is no production, there is no income. Consequently, if there is more production, there is going to be more income. If there is less production, there is going to be less income. Now divide both sides of the equation by the total population. What do you get? You would know that a rich country is one where per capita income is higher. Why is per capita income higher? Because this is production divided by the total population. Because productivity of the factors there is higher. This is the be all and end all of why nations are rich. A rich nation is one where every factor, every worker contributes more to the output process compared to any other country across the world. The game is this. There are many factors which make a country rich, but the bottom line is this part, right? A country would be rich if it is operating at a higher productivity, where every worker contributes more to the production process compared to other countries. Now, what would make a person more productive? What would make a worker more productive? क्या चीज इंसान को ज़्यादा productive बनाता है? Productivity का मतलब क्या? More output per input. If I ask you, what leads to greater worker productivity? Greater worker productivity कहाँ से आती है? Right? First, very simple to understand, is what we call capital. What that means is, if people in an economy, let's say, are engaged in digging sand, and sand is an output, you dig sand with your hands, then I give you a shovel to dig. In which case will you be digging more? When you are digging with your hands, or when you have a shovel also? Shovel, right? What is shovel? It's a tool. It's an implement. You put the implement in the hands of the worker, he's going to be more productive. Now replace the shovel with an earth mover, that JCB that you find, right? Replace this. There is a worker with a shovel, बेलचा बोलते हैं हमारे यहाँ, तुम्हारे यहाँ फावड़ा बोलते होंगे, right? The other is an earth mover, JCB. Who's going to be more productive? JCB. So first thing that makes a worker more productive is capital goods, or you will say capital formation. That is important. Second thing is improvement in the quality of capital. An earth mover is better capital compared to a shovel, right? Very simple to understand. The third thing is, of course, for you to operate an earth mover, for you to operate a JCB, you have to have the skill of operating that JCB. Third thing which is important is skill. If I ask any person on the road what makes a worker productive, they are definitely going to say these three, 100%, and they're not wrong. The fourth and the fifth factors are far more important. First is how work is organized. How do you organize the production process? Very, very, very important. Understand it this way. There is a brick kiln. The brick kiln has workers. The workers are engaged in the task of digging sand so that they could supply it to the kiln, and the kiln is going to make bricks. You have one push cart, you have one shovel, and you have one person. Imagine that this person spends 10 hours a day. His task is to dig the soil with the shovel, put it in the push cart, drop it down at this factory kiln here, right? Let's say, imaginatively, this person contributes, or this person can dig up 10 kgs of sand a day, right? He has to do both things. Now add one more worker here to this scenario. Add one more person, right? What do you think the contribution of this one person would be to the total production? Will it be 10 kgs? Will it be more than 10 kgs? Or will it be less than 10 kgs? It depends, right? There is one way wherein one person does both the things, right? Then he goes, when he is digging, the other person is only looking at it, right? He's digging, he's collecting sand, he's going to drop off the sand, the other person takes the shovel and then digs again. The other way of doing it is dividing this task into two simpler tasks. One person only does the digging, the other person only carries it from the place where it is being dug and deposits it to the brick kiln. Now, if this work is divided properly, what we say, if division of labor is leveraged properly, the total output will not be only 20 kgs, the total output will be greater than 20 kgs. Why will it be greater than 20 kgs? One is because of what we say, time saving. Time is being saved. The person previously who was digging, he could not carry while he was digging. And when he was carrying that sand, he could not dig in the same point in time, right? Could not happen simultaneously. When you have two people and you have given each of them their own special task, right? Then the person who is going to be involved in digging, he is going to be digging for 10 hours. Quite obviously, he will be contributing more than 10 kgs. The second more important thing is, if one person specializes only and only in digging, the more you repeat of the same task, the better you get at it. This is called dexterity. That means if this work was divided into smaller functions and each person was given a specific function to do, the output of this pura process will be far greater than 20 kgs. This will be the output. This is what we call efficiency gains. Efficiency gains that come from division of labor. If you take a complicated task, divide it into simpler, smaller tasks, and allow people to specialize in these simple, smaller tasks, the output is going to be higher. Very simple. Efficiency gains that come from division of labor. How work is organized. Imagine that they produce, let's say, 22 kgs. That means each person's contribution in the total production process now is 11 kgs, which is more than the previous case. Right? How work is organized. Or are you leveraging division of labor or not? The fifth factor is going to be about not the division of labor, it's going to be about scale. What do you mean by scale? Right? Now, scale would mean an increase in the size of the business. Manufacturing firms want to be bigger. Why would they want to be bigger? Not because they can be bigger, because there is a cost advantage to being bigger. What is the cost advantage? Once again, we'll try to see an example. Now imagine the same scenario, SI scenario hai, right? There is a brick kiln, and the brick kiln has something like this. As people, two workers are engaged. Right? These people collect the sand, they deposit it in the brick kiln, and from the brick kiln, you are going to get bricks. There is another brick kiln manufacturer. He wants to grow bigger. What he does is, he says, no, not this capital. Let me get a JCB. He gets a JCB, right? Now a JCB, the machine, because JCB is going to be far more productive in digging sand. If two people involved, let's say, dig 30 kgs, a JCB on its own is going to dig roughly around 1,000 kgs easily. It does not get tired, right? It's not a human being. Now for you to have a JCB, you also have to have an operator of the JCB. And because you are now producing roughly around 1,000 kgs of sand, you're going to require far too many workers to take the sand from here and deposit it in the kiln. Imagine that there are some 10 of these workers who take the sand from here, deposit it in the kiln that produces bricks. Now imagine the cost scenario. In the first case, let's assume that the pushcart and the shovel both cost rupees 100. And they have a shelf life of 1 year. Because they are going to be extensively used, you have to replace them after a year. This is their cost. And you pay workers, let's say, 10 rupees per day. Right? Now, imagine in 1 year, these workers are engaged for 300 days. What will be the total cost of this operation? Firstly, in 300 days, how much will this brick kiln manufacture in terms of sand? Kitna lenge? Every day they are producing 30 kgs. That means across 300 days, they will produce 9,000 kgs. And in 1 year, what will be the cost? The cost would be, firstly, the cost of workers. They have 2 workers. Each worker is paid 10 rupees per day. That means 20 rupees per day is the worker cost. 300 days, the total cost for workers would be 6,000. Plus the cost of capital involved here, which is 200 rupees. That means 9,000 kgs of sand is being manufactured for 6,200 rupees. That means 1 kg is manufactured for 6,200 divided by 9,000, roughly around 70 paisa. 1 kg of sand is manufactured at 70 paisa. Compare this with this scenario. Machine is going to be far too expensive compared to a shovel and a pushcart. Imagine that this machine costs 10,000 rupees. Right? They cost 100, this costs 10,000 rupees. Right? 100 times more. But the shelf life of this machine is far more compared to a shovel. This machine is going to last you 10 years. That means the per year cost of this machine is going to be how much? It's going to be 1,000. Now you have an operator. The operator is a skilled worker. Quite obviously, he will not be paid as less as 10 rupees per day. He will be paid twice as much as a unskilled worker is. Imagine that this operator gets 20 rupees per day, while every person who carries sand is paid 10 rupees per day. They also are operating in the same scenario, which is, say, 300 days. In 300 days, how much will be the total production? Every day, they are producing 1,000 kgs. That means in 300 days, they are going to be producing 3 lakh kgs. What is going to be the total cost in 300 days? Or per year cost kitni hogi? One, there is an operator who's paid 20 rupees per day. He has to work 300 days. That means 6,000 rupees is the cost of this driver come operator of this JCB. You are paying 100 rupees per day for other workers, right? This means 100 per day, 300 days, 30,000. 30,000 plus 6,000 is the cost of workers. Right? That is be 36,000 plus the cost of capital, which is going to be how much? 1,000 per year. Right? This means roughly the cost will be 37,000. You are making 3 lakh kgs of sand in 37,000 rupees. That means 1 kg of sand is made in how much? 37,000 divided by 3 lakh. Right? How much will this be? I think it will be closer to around 10 odd paisa. Right? This will be 10 paisa per kg. Is there a cost advantage or not? When they go to the market, one person is able to sell his sand at definitely more than 70 paisa per kg. The other person is producing far too much and is offering it at 10 paisa per kg. Who's going to be more cost competitive? The second one, right? It's a bigger operation, right? Manufacturing leverages what is called scale. This is called economies of scale. Economies of scale ka matlab kya? Some cost advantages that accrue to a firm because it grew bigger. Manufacturing allows you what is called economies of scale. First is called returns to scale. The other one is called economies of scale. Now compare the two sectors. You compare agriculture and you compare manufacturing. Imagine that we are talking about a cotton shirt making factory. How much scope for division of labor is there in agriculture? Very, very, very limited. What will you have? You will have an operation which tills the soil, then you drill the seeds into the soil, then irrigate, then apply fertilizers, wait for the crops to grow, then harvest. Right? These are the functions, right, in agriculture operations. How many functions in towards making a shirt? Far too many. First is what is called ginning. Ginning is when you take out fiber from the seed. After ginning, there is what is called dyeing. You dye that fiber. Third is yarn. Then is weaving. Weaving the yarn into fabric. Then is cutting the fabric. After this, there is sewing. Last there is post-production. Right? And I'm only telling you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, only telling you about 7 functions. There are far too many when you go within this also. Now, which sector will leverage what is called returns to scale? Right? Division of labor says, the more you divide a task into simpler, smaller tasks, the more will be the efficiency gains. Agriculture, at best, you can divide it amongst these 5 parts. In fact, many of them can be combined. Here, there are not just 7. In fact, this is much more than 7. Quite obviously, which will be more productive? This or this? Manufacturing is going to be more productive. Second, the cotton shirt factory is also going to be wanting to be bigger. Why? We just discussed. Why would it want to be bigger? Because of what is called economies of scale. There is a cost advantage to being bigger. This is how the rich countries of the world actually developed. What happened across the rich countries of the world was, previously they were primarily agrarian. Manufacturing explodes across the developed countries of the world. These plants first take workers from agriculture towards manufacturing. Why would they want to take agricultural workers towards manufacturing? Because they want to be bigger. They would require more workers. Workforce was absorbed from agriculture towards manufacturing. This meant that, imagine that in this scenario, they were making 3,000 kgs of cotton seeds and they had 100 workers. You did not require these 100 workers. This task could have been done easily by 30 workers. The 70 were disguised unemployment ka case. Right? You did not require 100, you required only 30. These 70 get shifted from agriculture towards manufacturing because the firms want to be bigger. That means this 3,000 kg eventually is going to be divided amongst 30 people only. Right? There is more output per person. Naturally, agriculture ki productivity increases. Right? Now, in these factory firms, there are workers who get employed, so these workers make incomes. In addition, in these factory firms, because they want to be bigger, they would also want more raw material. They have machines, they have too many workers, they want to produce cotton shirts, they would want more and more raw material. That means previously, if you are making 3,000 kgs, these factory firms are bigger. They want more than 3,000 kgs. So there is a pressure on the workforce here in agriculture to produce more given the same input. This pressure led to better processes, better techniques. For example, consolidation of land. Now there are fewer workers, land will get consolidated, and it will eventually also get mechanized. Techniques of intercropping. Techniques of crop sequencing. Since the factory wants more raw materials, you would also want to expand your irrigation systems. Right? This was a need created because they wanted more and more raw material. Now these things, improvement in processes, improvement in technology, further increase the production from agriculture, and this production now gets distributed amongst fewer workers. That means every farmer is going to be richer. Now these raw materials fuel the growth of factory outlets there. In the factory outlets also, quite obviously, there are workers These workers are making incomes. These workers also will demand food, and they will also demand other consumer goods, right? Now, since these farmers are going to get richer and richer, they would also want more consumer goods. Right? Previously, they had 1 shirt a year. Now, because they are richer, they would want 10 shirts a year. Right? This is the setting up of what is called a virtuous cycle. There is demand getting created for food products here and also other consumer products. There is demand getting created here for manufactured items too. This is a virtuous cycle that sets in. Now, eventually what also happened was technology improved. As factory owners, since they could sell more, because workers would want some of these goods and richer farmers would want some of these goods, these wealthy factory owners also started investing in better technology. Now, better technology would mean that workers will now also be displaced. There is scope only for skilled workers. So long as you're a skilled worker, you will be paid more. Why will you be paid more? Because skilled workers are harder to find. Right? Across the entire landscape, skilled workers will be far too less. Skilled workers are paid more. Now, if you're a worker who's working in that factory setting, you look at a person who is skilled and he makes more money. You would also want to be skilled, right? This creates the need for education. This creates the need for training. All these factory workers who are working here, imagine Ram works for this factory worker. He would also, because he gets tired in the entire day, he would also like to grab a beer. Would he or would he not? They're making incomes here. They get tired. They would like a beer, right? Now, previously, what used to be done, brewing used to happen within the homes itself. Now, there'll be many workers who are making some incomes, and also people here who are also getting wealthier. They would want beer, right? So there will be setting up of this distillery. There will be setting up of this brewery, but there will also be bars. And in these bars, there will be waitresses and waiters also, looking like this, right? There will be a demand for education. There will be a demand for services like breweries. There will also be, because it's a rich farmer does not want mass-produced shirts. He wants designer shirts, right? There is a demand for a designer also now, that I don't want to wear whatever is mass-produced. I want some fancy designer YSL, right? So this leads to the emergence of services also. Mind you, services are always there, right? Just that, eventually what is going to happen is, services, since they are what is called a derived demand. Derived demand ka matlab kya? As your incomes improve, right, you would want more and more services. As incomes improved, this created a demand for more and more services. So people who would get displaced here would move towards services, right? There is a requirement for university systems, education systems, right? Now it's not as simple as ghar pe apne papa se skill seekh li. Now it's about physics, chemistry, maths, natural sciences. There is emergence of universities. There is R&D happening, seed technology, better technology. You require very, very skilled workers. This cannot be done at home. There will be specialized institutions for these colleges, universities, right? You would want better shirts. You would want better engineers, better designers. That is the demand for services. Workers who will get displaced here will move towards services. Services will also absorb some workforce from agriculture. Eventually, in the employment and the output landscape, services emerges as the biggest sector. And this whole scenario is what you call structural transformation. The structure of the economy is transforming. It was primarily an agrarian economy, shifted towards manufacturing, where manufacturing absorbed a lot of workforce and also created a lot of output. Eventually, from manufacturing, right, you had more share of employment by services and also more share of output by services. This is what is called structural transformation. The West witnessed this structural transformation, right? So what is going to happen? The growth template is very simple. You have agriculture, you have manufacturing. Manufacturing explodes. It takes workers from agriculture, in process making agriculture more productive. Now the output is going to be distributed amongst lesser people. Manufacturing is going to be more productive. Why? Because the emergence of technology, capital, right? Manufacturing explodes, workers start to make more incomes, leads to the creation of more demand for services. Eventually in the landscape, you will find services are going to dominate both. They're going to dominate output. They're also going to dominate employment, right? Manufacturing first explodes in terms of employment and in terms of output. Then it declines in terms of employment. Why? Because Capital has now improved. Worker replacing technologies have now come into being. Eventually, most employment is going to be in services. Consequently, most output is also going to be in services. This is what is called the story of structural transformation. Now, I'll show you some graphs. And these graphs will clear to you what happened across the world. See, what you see is a very small picture. It's 1995 till around 2021. Very, very small picture in the entire time scale. Look at it this way. This is UK. This is, I think, South Korea. This is South Korea, and this is China. Right? Look at what happens to employment or workforce distribution in the UK. Mind you, this is 1841. So this is 19th century after Industrial Revolution. Now, 19th century ke beginning mein, can I annotate? Yeah. If you look at the share of services, services is this dotted line. Right now, the share of services in employment is 2011 is the highest, upwards of 80%. The share of agriculture in UK in terms of workforce distribution is only about 1 to 2 odd percent. Same is the case in the US, less than 1%. And in the manufacturing sector, roughly around 10 odd percent maybe. This is the distribution in UK. Now, when you look at UK, you're not looking at it completely. In the UK, this structural transformation was not as natural, was not as rapid. In the UK, if I could tell you behind this what had happened, 1550, 65% of workforce was in agriculture. It took UK 200 years to reduce this workforce from 65% to 35% by 1750. And post 1750, aided by Industrial Revolution, this structural transformation actually accelerated. Right? So this is not the entire picture. The first country to witness Industrial Revolution is the UK. So it's a far more elaborate history. Compare this with South Korea. South Korea, this is the agricultural share of employment, straight up declines. South Korea, manufacturing peaks first in terms of employment and then declines. What happens to services? Continues to increase. This is transformation. In China, in terms of employment, this is services, services is the green one, somewhere around 40 odd percent, 40 to 45 odd. In terms of agriculture, agriculture is still dominant in China, right? And this is also numbers till 2012. I'm sure the numbers would have been updated up until now, right? In China also, you'll start to see that manufacturing employment is picking up, so are services. Eventually, manufacturing employment is going to decline because of better technology, and services are going to pick up, right? This is what happened across the world. In terms of output, in terms of employment, how services become much more relevant. Now, despite this, is there any doubt up until now? I'll allow you to ask questions after the end of the session, right? Is this clear, whatever I have told you up until now? Clear? Derived demand ka matlab hai ki only if agriculture implodes, if manufacturing explodes rather, right, you will have incomes made by people and they will demand more services, right? Which is to say, for example, you're a student, right? Right now, if you have to get to home, you'll use metro. If you make incomes, you will demand Uber, right, as a cab ride, right? When you make more incomes, you will demand Uniqlo ke kapde, you will demand YSL ki perfumes, right? It's a derived demand. More your incomes grow, more you will demand services. Clear up until now? Now, in terms of both employment and in terms of output produced, services will eventually dominate. Despite this, services was never seen, previously, historically, never seen as the engine of growth. It was not seen as the engine of growth. Manufacturing used to be considered the engine of growth if an economy has to grow from a lower income country to a high income country. Why? There were two reasons behind it. First reason was that services are what we call intensely local in nature. Local ka meaning kya hai? You want to get a haircut, you will have to go to the barber. The barber and you have to be in the same place for you to get a haircut. The barber cannot store that service somewhere so that you realize the service later. You want to get educated, you have to go to a school where the teacher who is the supplier and you who is the buyer are going to meet. Services could not be traded as much because it could not be stored. Services were consumed the moment they are produced. That means both the buyer and the seller has to be in the same place. which affected the trade of services per se. Manufactured goods are not the same. Manufactured goods, you manufacture it here, you can supply it to Bhubaneswar, you can supply it to Bangalore, because these goods can be traded. Services there was an impediment of trade to services. This started to change because of technology. And technology made it possible for services to be produced at a distance. So some person who wants to now prepare for civil services does not have to come to Delhi and sit in the class. You could be in Bangalore, you could be in Kerala, you could be in Jammu and Kashmir, you could be witnessing the same class happening in real time. They don't have to be here. Why? Because technology has given us that platform. If Legrand wants to come to India and sell electronic appliances, they're going to talk to a consultant and ask of them, is India a great market? The consultant does not have to be in England to give this service to Legrand. The consultant could be here in the US, could be here in India. He only has to send a PPT to those people, and the PPT can be, a software product, it can be emailed. The consultant will also have a back team of analysts. These analysts do not have to be in the same place where the consultant is. Consultant could be in England. These analysts could be in India, somewhere in Bangalore, somewhere in Gurgaon. Right? Now they can be produced at a distance that improved the trade potential of services. Get this? Previously were not considered the engines of growth. Why? Because they could not be traded as much as a manufactured good could be. Because a good can be stored and it can be traded later. Service has to be consumed the moment it is produced. But with the emergence of technology, services could now be produced at a distance. The supplier and the buyer do not have to be in the same place. Second is what is called servicification of manufacturing. And this has been a dominant theme in your economic survey this year. Right? Servicification of manufacturing. Servicification of manufacturing, what does it mean? Anybody who knows what servicification of manufacturing means? Servicification of manufacturing basically means that manufacturing and services are getting so intertwined that when you look at the value of the manufactured good, it will have inbuilt within it so many services ka value. You will understand it better if I give you an example. Consider the best smartphone that you have. You have a Samsung S24, right? A Samsung S24 trades at 1,000 US dollars. This is the value of this product, right? Now when this Samsung S24 is being conceived, there are so many operations across the value chain. Firstly, in this Samsung S24, there has to be an OS, operating system. There has to be a UI, user interface. Before this Samsung S24, which is a flagship phone of Samsung, is produced, there will be many people engaged in the research and development as to what this product will look like. What kind of screens are going to go into S24? Which processor will we use? What kind of cameras will be used? Right? What kind of features will there be in this Samsung S24? That means an R&D. R&D goes, and R&D would be done by experts, and experts are far few and between. That means these experts will also be a high cost to Samsung. After the R&D is done, this is sent for, let's say, manufacturing. Manufacturing mein kya hai? It's just getting inputs, right? Assembling the battery, assembling the storage, assembling the screen, assembling the frame, right? All of them together, that's manufacturing essentially. So it includes inputs, it includes the cost of workers, it includes the cost of assembly. Post-manufacturing, within Samsung itself, you will find that there are tons of Samsung ecosystem. Samsung ka Pay hai uske andar, right? You have Samsung ki cyber security solutions also, right? There's a lot of software involved in there. After this product is manufactured, these features will have to be advertised. How do you know Samsung has so much? Because you see a lot of ads, right? Post-advertisements, when this product is actually sold, there is also post-sales, repair and maintenance. Each of this is a cost to Samsung. Each of this, right? R&D, developing your OS, developing your own UI, high-skilled work. You'll be done by people who are programmers. They're writing millions of lines of code for this to be possible. Right? This is a cost to Samsung. Then there is a cost of manufacturing. Then there is a cost of advertising what you have produced. Then when you sell it off, there will be trade and you can say wholesale trade, retail trade, they will have their own margins. At the end, after selling it, you also have to have post-sale, repair and maintenance. Everything is a cost to Samsung, which gets included in here, which is $1,000 US. Do you know how much is the proportion of only and only manufacturing in the total cost? At best, it will be roughly around 30 to 40 odd %, at best. That means only $300 to $400 is the cost of manufacturing that Samsung ka product. But when you look at the sales of Samsung, you're only looking at how many goods did Samsung manufacture and sell. You're not including amongst them the cost of each of these services. Each of these are services. Trade and repair is a service. You have a post-sale operations and maintenance, this is a service. You have advertisement, which is a service. You have R&D, which is a service. Within this 1,000 USD, there is an increasing value of services embedded within this product. So what has been witnessed of late is in manufactured commodities, there is an increasing trend towards a greater share of service ka value also. Either embedded within the product, you are looking at only at the Samsung ka phone. It has so many services inbuilt in it, right? Either embedded within the product or bundled with the product, which is to say, when you have a car, like an IC engine car, कार के बाद लेने के बाद उसकी maintenance भी होती है, right? That is sold as a bundle with that product itself. When you are looking at manufacturing a contribution to the GDP, right? There is inbuilt within manufacturing also many services, and these services are high-end services. These high-end services are going to make the product better, more innovative, and also will be one of the major reasons behind increased sales. You have a better phone today. Right? And if you have seen in the last few odd years, 10 odd years, how fast phones have improved, right? On the back of these services. These are high value services. And if Samsung sells more, you will require many traders. You will require many wholesalers. You will also require transport and many distribution companies also. So this creates a scope for both high-end skilled laborers or high-end skilled service providers and also low-end skilled service providers, people who are engaged in transportation, distribution, retail, wholesale, post-sale, repairs and maintenance, right? This is what is called servicification of manufacturing. That means manufacturing and services are getting intertwined. When you look at the output of manufacturing, within the output of manufacturing, there is a value of service which is built in, and this is increasing of late. This and the previous part, that services could now be traded at a distance, this increased the export potential of who? Of services. Because now when you are exporting that Samsung ka phone, you are also exporting that service which is embedded within that phone. When you look at services ka exports, right, when the graph that we look at, it does not capture this. Right? But clearly there has been a greater trend towards exports. Now, people who are belonging to different countries, they don't have to come here, right? Let's say in the case of healthcare, if tomorrow robotic surgery becomes far too common, people will not have to travel to India to get operated upon. Any person who is a practitioner, healthcare practitioner, will be sitting here in Medanta, operating upon a person who is sitting in Ohio. That is also an export without them having to move, right? Both of them increase the export potential, and as you see in the world economies, the export of services is also going to pick up. So in terms of the contribution of services to the GDP, in terms of contribution of services to the employment, in terms of contribution to services, in terms of exports, everything has been increasing. And this is particularly important because it creates space for both high-skilled workers and also low-skilled workers, right? This has been the global trend. Look at the charts now. Any problems understanding this? Right? This was workforce distribution only to show you structural transformation. This is what is called the smile curve. The smile curve represents servicification of manufacturing, which means greater value is being added by services, pre-production, post-production, right? And manufacturing is only a proportion of the total output of the manufacturing industries. Right? Maybe you will get a simple question on what does smile curve represent. Smile curve is essentially a representation of servicification of manufacturing itself, that the service ka value addition to the manufacturing units is also increasing. Right? Can you clearly see pre-production, post-production, pre-production, production, and post-production? This is the supply chain or the value chain, and this is value added. Right? Here you will have R&D, right, which is going to be very, very expert people. Everybody gets paid so much more. Why? Because there are very, very few in terms of, you find a skilled programmer, you'll have very, very few of those. High value addition here because it's a high cost to Samsung. Right? Then it gets manufactured somewhere in China. Then post-manufacturing, it gets transported across multiple continents, transportation, distribution, then it gets delivered to your wholesalers, from wholesalers to retailers, and after it gets sold, there are also support services. So logistics, retail, support services, these will be mostly the low-end services, but they form a greater proportion of the value of Samsung ka phone, plus the R&D and headquarters services, right? The production, the manufacturing value added is only roughly around 30-40%. That's about it. Get this? You may get a straight question on smile curve. What does a smile curve represent? Now, having all that learning, look at the graphs now, right? Do you understand now how services become important, right? Across the globe, particularly more so for the developed economies of the world because they are now tertiary economies, right? Why? They don't want to engage in production, in manufacturing, because manufacturing is only 30% of the total value, right? They are retaining 70% of the value because they are investing in high-skilled workers also, high-level technologies also. Look at this. Services share of GDP in the economies across in all income levels, which is to say the World Bank classification of countries, lower middle income countries, upper middle income countries, high income countries. Look at this is for the world level. World mein, it is roughly around 66%, 1995. 2022, it has increased to roughly around 67%. In the last 2 odd decades, services ka contribution to GDP is somewhere, across the world, it is somewhere 67%. Where are we? We are at a 55%, right? So in terms of our comparison with what is happening across the globe, we are still not there. Although 55% is not abominable, it's great. Second, for high income countries, it is greater than 66%, which is going to be somewhere around 70 odd. Here, it will be somewhere closer to more than 70%. Look at the economic survey. The economic survey also presents to you the same chart. Compares countries, right? Argentina, Brazil, China. Look at China itself only, right? China, services ka GVI as proportion of GDP. How much is China? Roughly around, it'll be closer to 60 odd percent, like 55 odd. But in terms of growth rate of services, right? This growth rate of services has been upwards of 3 odd percent. This is you comparing yourself with China. Where are you? You would be somewhere here. This is India, right? India ka service sector ka contribution to GDP is less than that of China, but the growth in terms of India is also less than that of China, right? Compare this with the UK and the US. UK is somewhere around, this will be closer to 80% in terms of service ka contribution to its GDP. US ka will be definitely very close to 80% in terms of service contribution to the GDP. Growth rates have been lesser. Get this? This is the chart presented to you by who? By the economic survey this year. Look at share of employment by sector across the world. Now, across the world, you can clearly see the legend. This one is services, the sky blue one is agriculture, and the red one is industry. Now, agriculture has been declining across the globe. Services is picking up across the globe. Right? In 2021, services accounted for 49.7% of the employment share across the world. That means if 100 jobs were created, roughly 50 jobs were created by the services sector itself. Right? This is across the globe. Look at the trend of global services exports. Right? How have they increased? They have gone from $2.7 trillion in 2005 to 2023 mein $7.9 trillion. They have increased threefold. Why would they have increased threefold? The last two things that I told you. First, services can now be traded at a distance because they now can be produced at a distance. Second is the trend of servicification of manufacturing. It is picking up across the globe. It has increased 3 times since 2005 till 2023. This is, we are talking about the global numbers. We're not using Indian numbers just yet. Top 8 service exporters across the world, because this is information that you would want. Ki prelims mein pooch to nahi lega, right? This is that information. India, in terms of service exporters across the world, is at the 7th spot. Greatest is the US. India is at the 7th spot. Now they may ask you a question that in terms of total service exports, India is at the 7th, but in terms of growth rate of India's exports, service exports, growth rate ka matlab kya? How much have services ka exports grown? India would be in the top 5. By value, 7th. By growth rate percentage, somewhere amongst the top 5. Get this? This kind of question they may ask you straight up in prelims. This is the nuance that later on, अरे तो growth rate पूछा है, ये contribution to GDP नहीं पूछा है. Now, let us move to what is happening in India, right? Growth trends in India's service sector. India witnessed greater than 7 times growth in service sector share in the GDP since 1995, right? That means across the world, what is happening compared to what is happening in India, India's service sector has grown far more compared to what is happening across the world. We are growing 7 times. We have grown 7 times since 1995. Right now, we will be somewhere around, in fact, I've written down all of these data points for you to mug up later on. Right? I have only culled down what is important for you. Pre-1991 reforms, services contributed 38% to your GDP. Right now, they're contributing somewhere 55% of your GDP in 2025. At around 55%, the contribution of services to GDP is higher than the combined share. Of course, it will be higher than the combined share of agriculture and manufacturing combined. The global share of GDP for services still remains higher because the global share is 62%. You are at a 55%. Right? These are data points that you have to remember. Growth rate of the services sector. Remember, that is contribution to GDP. Right? In terms of अगर 100 रुपए का output बन रहा है, services कितना बना रहे हैं. This is growth rate. That means year on year services कितना grow कर रहा है. Growth rate of India's services sector has consistently been higher than the growth rate of services sector for the entire world. Consistently been higher. The only exception is the COVID years where it declined compared to world key services ka share. Right? These graphs will then start to make more sense to you. In India, services have grown far more than services have grown across the globe. Right? This graph, easy to understand. These data points you have to remember. First, that growth in the services sector has consistently been higher than overall GDP growth. Right? That means if India is growing at a 6%, services ka sector would be growing at more than 6%, and this has been consistent, right? Higher than the growth in agriculture or manufacturing combined. That means services is higher, the growth in services is higher than the growth in GDP, the growth in services is higher than the growth in agriculture, the growth in services is higher than the growth in manufacturing. This is for India. The growth in service sector has been above 6% in each year in the last decade except for COVID-19. Because this kind of a statement, when they may ask you in the prelims question, has it been consistently higher than 6% in the last decade or so? And you should know that except for the COVID year, it has been, right? But there was one, you can say outlier case, which is the years of COVID. This kind of statement, they may ask you straight up in prelims, right? Because they are very interested in trends. What trends zarur puchte hain. The average service sector growth rate before pandemic was 8%, post-pandemic it has been 8.3%. That means post-pandemic, services have recovered in terms of growth also, right? Can you remember these data points? Service sector ka share in employment. Remember we were talking about GDP. We were talking about service sector contribution in terms of growth. Here it is service sector contribution in terms of employment. Now compare India. This is India, world, low income countries, upper middle income countries, lower middle income countries, and high income countries. See, high income countries mein services contribute somewhere around 75% of the total employment. In India, this is not the case. In India, this is stuck somewhere around 31%, right? So in terms of structural transformation, right, India's structural transformation has not been complete. What should this tell you? That in India, services ka output produces 55% of the country's output. Services ka export has been 43% of the total exports of the country, right? But the share of services in employment has not been 75% as has been the case in the West. It is only around 31%. What does it tell you? It tells you jobless growth. Why jobless growth? Because you are probably growing in such service sectors which are not very labor intensive. That means the low skilled workers, right, in terms of services, they are not getting as many jobs, right? People are getting employment in high skilled work. Software exports. Software exports, compared to what you may think, it does not contribute a lot of employment in the country because it's high-skilled work, and high-skilled workers are far and few between. Get this? That means in India, services growth has been on the back of emerging sectors, not on the basis of traditional sectors. Traditional sectors such as tourism, traditional sectors such as travel. Right? Primarily on the back of emerging sectors, which we'll see furthermore. Do you now interpret these figures? That means contribution to output to बढ़ रहा है, right? But employment नहीं बढ़ रही. That means you are probably growing in some sectors which are not very labor intensive. These must be high skilled sectors, right? Where you are growing. By value to output बढ़ जाएगी, but employment में output उतना नहीं बढ़ेगा. Get this? This should also tell you that in India, structural transformation has just not been complete. Across the world, services contribute both, right? At least in the high income countries, they contribute highly to the GDP. They also contribute very highly to the employment. In India, they contribute highly to GDP, not so highly in terms of employment. And it is not because services are not labor intensive. There are both ends of services spectrum. Some are labor intensive, some are not. Look at these trends. Employment share across the world. Services ka employment share has increased from 1995. It used to be across the world, it was 37.8%, and it has increased to roughly around half. Remember, we are talking about the entire world. Manufacturing would have definitely declined. This is agriculture. Agriculture has definitely declined across the world, closer to 20-odd%. And in industry, this is somewhere stable around 20-odd%. But services ka employment across the world is rising. Compare this with this is India's agricultural workforce, which is still stuck somewhere around 45-46%. India mein services ka expansion has been high, but not as high compared with the rest of the world. More specifically, compared with high-income countries, you are still stuck at 31.5%. Manufacturing has basically plateaued. In India, manufacturing employment started declining since 2008. Right? There are aspersions that we probably peaked too early. Right? Now compare this. In the last few years, what has been the contribution of service sector towards employment in India? Somewhere, you just remember the outlier cases. Outlier would be, when was it the lowest? Last year it was the lowest, right? 28.9%, but usually fluctuates between 32 to roughly 30%. This is the contribution of services sector towards employment in the country, right? You don't have to remember each of these numbers, just look at the outliers, कि बहुत ज़्यादा कहाँ था, बहुत कम कहाँ था, and generally किस range में रहता है, right? Generally remains in the range of 29 to 32%. इतना ही employment है, but world में कितना है? More than 70. More specifically, developed countries of the world में more than 70% employment is services. Get this? Okay. Now look at previous year's questions. Right? How is it relevant for mains more specifically? Data to prelims hai, but mains ke questions dekho. First question was, normally countries shift from agriculture to industry and then later to services. But India directly shifted from agriculture to services. What are the reasons behind the huge growth of services vis-a-vis industry in the country? Can India become a developed country without a strong industrial base? Can it not? You don't read the newspaper, no? Because of servicification of manufacturing, you can clearly see across the world, they want to be invested in services more than they are invested in manufacturing. Look at the developed countries of the world. In India, Dr. Raghuram Rajan, also advocates for the same approach, that the manufacturing ship for us has sailed. Right? Because there is greater trend towards servicification of manufacturing, why don't we concentrate ourselves towards high-skilled workforce? Right? You can grow on the back of services also. Remember, it's not a law that a country has to go from agriculture to manufacturing to services. It's not a law. It's the growth template which is followed by the West, replicated by the East Asian economies and also replicated by China. May not be, you can say, a lucrative growth model for us in the future because there is a greater servicification of manufacturing happening now. And our advantage is more in services compared to manufacturing. Right? This is a question which is directly linked to structural transformation. कि तुम्हें पता भी है ये होता क्या? Structural transformation. Second is, the nature of economic growth in India in the recent times is often described as jobless growth. Do you agree with this view? Give arguments in favor of your answer. Third is, economic growth in the recent past has been led by an increase in productivity. Explain this statement. Suggest the growth pattern that will lead to creation of more jobs without compromising labor productivity. Do you now place yourself in terms of how productivity affects growth? The answer here is structural transformation, and add to them servicification of manufacturing. You will have a clear answer to this question. Right? It has grown on the back of greater productivity. Services maybe, you will see, there will be many more data points that you will be able to now place in these answers ki kaun kahan use karna hota hai. Right? I don't know what answers have been given to you up until now for this question. This question is primarily one that of structural transformation. How economies go from low productivity economies to high productivity economies by the shift of workforce, where it eventually settles down in services. This is the answer to the question. What has happened in the case of India? Incomplete structural transformation. It really has not happened. Now, once again, broader numbers are clear to you, right? In terms of services contribution to GDP across the globe and in India, services contribution to employment across the globe and in India, services contribution in terms of exports across the globe and in India. Now you will have to identify subsectors within services in case of India which are performing well and which are not performing well. Remember, services is a very, very heterogeneous group. That means you will find some subsectors which contribute highly to the GDP, not as highly to the employment. There may be some sectors which contribute very highly to exports, not as highly to domestic, you would say, value addition. It's a very, very heterogeneous group. You have to understand that, which is why I showed you the first slide. 15 services, there will be high-skilled services, and there will also be low-skilled services. Now, look at your top performers. Top 7 service sector contributors to GDP, right? Top 7, in fact, I think I've, just a moment. I would have written it down somewhere here. In terms of exports, let's see. Top 7 services sectors which contributed the most to Indian GDP. Remember, top 7 sectors contribute 87% of the services contribution. That means the bottom 8 sectors only contribute 13% of the services contribution to GDP. That means if services contributing 100, 87 are in top sectors. Which are those top sectors? Professional, scientific and other business services. And in the context of this year's economic survey, other business services are very, very relevant. Right? In the last few years, there has been a growth in professional services also being offered in India. Professional services, why? Because there is an increasing trend towards FDI investments. And when people come to move their base towards India, they would also require lawyers, they will require accountants, they will require engineers, they will require architects. Last few years, there has been a huge growth in this sector, professional services, right? Professional, scientific and other business services, mind you, this will include R&D, contributes roughly around 20% of the services sector contribution. Trade and repair is the second highest in terms of the contribution to GDP. This is 19%. Government services is 12%. Financial services, the BFSI sector, banking, financial services sector contributes between 9 to 11%. Computer and information services around 11%. And I know for a fact, if you are asked a question in prelims, तुम्हें लगता है ये सबसे पहले. Computer and information services, right? This is at 11%, followed by transport, which is 9 to 10%, education, which is 7 to 8%. These are your top 7 contributors in terms of services contribution towards GDP. Top 7 contribute 87% in 2022-23, and this has been a trend across the years. It has been a trend. Consistently, top 7 sectors are contributing 87% in terms of GDP. That means India mein service sector growth has been lopsided. It's not diversified. It's not very well diversified. Next, bottom 8 sectors contribute only 13% in 2022-23. Bottom 8 mein the important ones are healthcare, important ones are tourism, if I'm not mistaken. Right? These are the important ones. They don't grow as much compared to the other 7. In terms of employment, you will find employment highest kahan par hai? Trade and repair, 36%. Transport, 14%. Education, 10.2%. Now remember, trade and repair was not there in terms of contribution to GDP. Right? Towards GDP, it does not contribute much, but towards employment, it does contribute a lot. Transportation, towards GDP, not as much, but in terms of employment, creates a lot. Education, towards GDP, was there in the top 7, but not the highest, but contributes highly towards employment also. Travel, somewhere around 6.9%. Professional, scientific and other business services, जो मैंने yellow में mark करके रखा हुआ है, these are data points that you should remember, because this helps you make an informed guess in your prelims examination. Professional, scientific and other business services decreased from 7% to 5.9% in 2023 to 24. The BFSI sector contributes only 3.5%. Health services has increased from 3.9 to 4.5%. Computer and information services, यहाँ पर आ जाएगा तुम्हारे पास IT, ITES, they're somewhere around 4%, right? Not the highest in terms of employment created, but quite high in terms of output, quite high in terms of exports. Get this? Very, very heterogeneous group. Top 8 service exporters across the world, we just discussed this. Remember this data, you should remember. India remained amongst the top 5 major countries in terms of growth in services exports. Service export की growth कितनी हुई है उसमें हम top 5 में हैं. But in terms of total share of our service exports across the world trade, we are at 7th, right? मैंने लिख के रखा हुआ important data points to remember. Service exports from India are about 43% of India's exports. So you will have merchandise export, merchandise trade, and you will have trade in services. Services contribute 43% of India's export. One thing you have to remember here is it does not capture manufacturing, servicification of manufacturing. It does not capture that. It only captures BOP trade, which is the direct export and import of services. ये उसको capture करता है, servicification को नहीं करता. That means in reality it will be higher. But in terms of direct exports of services, 43%. That means if India exports value of 100 rupees, 43 are service exports. Second, India's goods exports grew to 432 billion in 2023 at a CAGR of 8.5% since 2005. India's share in global goods exports that increased from under 1% to 1.8% in 2023. This is a comparison between goods ka trade and services ka trade. Service exports of India grew to 338 billion in 2023 at a CAGR of 10.9. That means greater than the CAGR of goods ka trade. Services ka trade has increased at a faster rate. Secondly, the CAGR is nearly double the growth of service exports across the world. Right? हर country की service exports increase हुई हैं. India में जो service exports का growth rate है, that has nearly been the double of growth rate across the world. Right? India's share in global services exports rose from under 2% to 4.3% in 2023. Okay. Like I said, what do these numbers mean? इनका meaning क्या है? Rapid growth in export of services means that India is getting greatly integrated with the world markets. That means you are supplying services to the world. These services could be in the form of software exports. These services could be in the form of professional services such as lawyers, legal accountants, you would say accountants generally. You will have architects, engineers, right? Mostly that. One more trend is the shift in the structure of service exports from India, which is the contribution of traditional services, transport and travel in total service exports has declined, while the emergence of modern subsectors dominates India's service exports presently. On the back of two things, remember, once again. Two things, which ones? Now services can be traded at a distance. Second is servicification of manufacturing. These are the two trends that you have to definitely remember. Right? The contribution of other services, construction, finance, computer and information services, other business services are on the rise. Traditional services decline pe hai, and this is, remember, only in terms of exports. Right? But in terms of exports, modern subsectors are emerging. Now, composition of service exports in India, top 7 sectors approximately account for 96% of your service exports. Remember, one thing is, out of our total exports, which includes both goods and services are 43%. In that 43%, 96% is contributed by the top 7 sectors itself. And within the top 7 sectors, there are 2, computer and information services, professional, scientific and other business services, which contribute 68% of this. That means it's heavily lopsided. Service exports from India are heavily lopsided towards these 2 subsectors. They are not very well diversified. Get this? These are data points you have to remember. Economic survey data, computer services and business services exports account for 70% of India's services exports. Though he subsectors ka export is roughly around 70% of India's total service exports in the country, lopsided. Professional and scientific and other business services is the largest contributor. Second largest is computer and information services. Remember, जो software development वाला part है वो यहाँ आएगा, इसमें नहीं, right? वो इसमें आएगा, इसमें नहीं. Get this? This is basically about networks. And this is basically about how information will be. This is cloud storage, network security, support, admin support functions. That is computer and information services. Right? Software development is going to be here somewhere. Professional, scientific, and other business services. वो इसमें आएगा. Right? This is the largest contributor. And I remember, मैंने सारा data point जो तुमको याद रखना है वो निकाल के इसमें रखा हुआ है. Right? यही देख लेना, 5-6 बार देख लेना before you go for your prelims, right? So that you know. Reasons behind strong performance of these services, in fact, basically two: professional, right? Which ones? Professional, scientific, and other business services, computer and information services. What were the reasons behind an increased export of this? Right? India की इतनी strong performance यहाँ क्यों है? First is what you know, which is servicification of manufacturing, which is to say across the global value chain, service ka value added is increasing generally. Second is India's labor advantage. Comparative advantage of India towards labor, which is to say India has both high-skilled labor force. India also has the labor force for labor-intensive sectors. दोनों type की labor force India में हैं. Third is increase in cross-border mobility of labor, right? Owing to globalization के pressures, movement between different countries became far more easier. It used to be far more easier, now is not as much. Second, the next is outsourcing strategy. That means, right, because in the developed countries of the world, labor is generally very, very expensive. So what they do is non-core functions, support functions, they would outsource to countries like ours, where the labor is cheap. Right? This outsourcing strategy also contributed to India's service exports. The other strategy is called offshoring. Offshoring ka matlab kya? You have subsidiary offices that you set up here in the form of investment. Right? It started from, if you remember the India's growth story, classes mein to padha hi hoga, it started from what is called the rise of BPO industry, business process outsourcing, right, where they would set up yahan call centers, support functions ke liye. Right, from business process outsourcing to knowledge process outsourcing, which was moving up the value chain. From knowledge process outsourcing, KPOs, now we have what is called GCCs, Global Capability Centers. What are Global Capability Centers? I have worked across one of those. Right, these centers are essentially what? Like McKinsey is a big consulting firm. McKinsey consultants will primarily be in other geographies, right? So they will not want to do these data crunching ke roles. They will not want to Google numbers. They would not want to talk to people. For that support functions, they have teams in India, right? People like us, we are going to be doing cold calling on their behalf. We are going to be looking for numbers on their behalf. We give the numbers that these people want. Eventually, they will make the PPT and sell that PPT, right? This is what happens. Now, these big companies have realized that the STEM workforce in India, science, technology, engineering, mathematics workforces in India is quite sharp. And it is also very, very cheap. So what they are doing is, they are moving away from just support functions to even high value-added functions. For example, business analytics now happens primarily in India because the STEM workforce in India is strong and it's also far cheaper compared to the rest of the world. Plus, there are also pressures of growing protectionism. Now there are also pressures in terms of you getting H-1B visas, getting L-1 visas. So this strategy works better for these MNCs. These are some of the reasons behind the growth of service exports in India, precisely in professional services, business services, computer and information services. Some of the reasons you should know, not the only ones, some of these reasons are these. Manufacturing ka servicification, comparative advantage of India in terms of cost competitiveness. We have both high-skilled workers and also low-skilled workers who are going to be working for far cheaper compared to what happens in the rest of the world. Outsourcing strategy, offshoring strategy of companies, and cross-mobility of labor, which was easy previously, is not as easy now. In fact, मैंने लिख के रखा हुआ है इसमें, 73% of all H-1B visas issued in the US, Indians. Roughly 31% of L-1 visas are intra-corporate transferees. Right? जो internal job postings के through जैसे TCS से अगर आप बाहर जाओगे तो L1 visa मिलेगा आपको, right? This is a significant chunk of temporary skilled workers in the US is Indians. Why? Cheaper, right? Skilled and also cheap. On the back of this, your companies like Wipro, Infosys, TCS rose on the back of this because they are basically labor contractors. They have cheap labor here, right? There is a requirement for this labor elsewhere. They're going to supply you projects because the projects will be far cheaper in India compared to the US. Right? This is how your companies grew. Then you have challenges, at least in the recent past, what have been the challenges? First is the availability of highly skilled workers. Now imagine the servicification of manufacturing, right? In that smartphone now, you have Google's own AI assistant, right? You have Samsung's own AI assistant. AI is going to be, you can say, purging across multiple goods. Do you have your own LLM? India does not, China has, right? DeepSeek, China ने अभी एक और Alibaba ने भी ले आया अपना कुछ तो, right? They have their own LLMs. You are going to move even up the value chain. You are going to require not people who are good with Excels. You are going to require people who are good with maths, with statistics, complicated maths. Do you have them? Can you skill them? And can you reskill them? Because in the tech sphere, technology changes very, very fast. So you have to keep up to date, right? This is going to be a big challenge for India. In the servicification of manufacturing, there will be even high value added skills which are going to be added in the future. Is India prepared for that or not? Low-end service production, software production we can do, right? High-end, cutting-edge software solutions, do we have them? That will be a challenge in the future. We're not saying it's impossible. We are saying that it will be a challenge in the future, which is availability of high-skilled workforce and their retention in India, because these people are going to go, right? ये जाएंगे US में, वहाँ पर काम करेंगे, and they will acquire citizenship, जो भी करेंगे, वहाँ करेंगे. इनको retain करना India में is going to be a challenge. Next, upskilling and reskilling of its workforce. Now remember, just not upskilling, reskilling, because technology changes very, very fast. So you have to keep reskilling them also. Enhancing India's own R&D capabilities, that's going to be challenging. And external barriers, which is quantitative caps on visas. You would have seen that across the world, there is a growing trend towards protectionism, right? Make America great again, bring back manufacturing, bring back everything to America. Right, so you will have as Indians, जब सारे H1B visas Indians ही जाके capitalize कर लेंगे, तो there will be resistance. Right, so there is quantitative caps on H1B visas, quantitative caps on L1 visas. They bring up discretionary requirements की proof of concept बताओ कि आपकी requirement है यहाँ पर कि नहीं, right? आपको permit issue करने से पहले. They also have raised the minimum wage requirement for you to be given an H1B visa. This is protectionism across the world. And if there is a protectionism which is going to be on the rise, quite obviously companies like TCS, companies like Wipro, Infosys, they are going to suffer. Because a major chunk of their revenues, in fact, upwards of 90% of their revenues come from service exports, which is precisely on the basis of offshoring and outsourcing, right? And if there is going to be greater protectionism in the times to come, the exports of services from India are going to suffer. So this is something that you have to look for, which is quantitative caps on visas. That means they are going to give limited number of visas, temporary skilled workers को limited number of visas देंगे, and these visas are going to decline. Discretionary hike in visa fee, which adds to the cost of the employer. Increase in minimum wage requirement for H1B visa eligibility. Request for evidence that you actually want to supply a skilled worker there. Bills that ban outsourcing of government contracts to third world countries. Sorry, not third world, to third countries. And last is this one, EU adequacy test. Right, this had been on the decline specifically from the EU because EU has something called GDPR, General Data Protection Rules. So they're not going to be giving you contracts unless your domestic data protection legislation matches the standards of EU itself. This is what you call the EU adequacy test. Now India has its own DPDP, right? Maybe it matches in EU's adequacy test. Maybe there may be rise in terms of service exports towards EU also, but the main geography has been US precisely. Get this? These are things that you have to keep in mind. Now, other important service sectors which are going to be emerging are travel, transport, right? As India develops, tourism is going to pick up, travel is going to pick up, right? If India rises in terms of incomes, clearly people would want recreational facilities also. They would also want to be touring, traveling. Domestic demand bhi badegi, global demand bhi badegi, provided that India positions itself as a tourist destination. Law and order will be required for that. Infrastructure will be required for that. Many things will be required for that. These are your emerging sectors. Remember, lopsided. Primarily kaun si? Professional, business services, computer and information services, right? Scientific services. This is where your most exports are lopsided. Now, emerging sectors in India, I've given you a classification. Please read this. इसमें से कौन-कौन से sectors emerging हैं. This was a chart which was given in an economic survey also, right? What does this chart represent? It represents 3 dimensions. One is the service sector का contribution to employment. Second is the service sector का contribution to exports. Third is service sector का contribution to GDP. You may have some sectors which contribute highly towards employment, not as highly towards exports. Some sectors which contribute highly towards GDP, not as highly towards exports. Some sectors which contribute more towards employment, not as high towards exports. And they have charted this here. What I've done is I've created a table for you, right? Just so you remember. देखो, export share जिसका ज़्यादा होगा and जिसका contribution to GDP ज़्यादा होगा, employment share reasonable भी हो सकता है. That is going to be a highly productive sector. Highly productive क्यों? Because it involves less workforce, it gives you more output, and is also export oriented. These sectors have been classified as sectors that we want to defend in the times to come. Right? Which are these sectors? The first two. Computer and information services, professional, scientific, and other services. They together contribute export share में कितना? Roughly 70%. GVA share will be roughly around 30% contribution to the GDP. And employment share is not a lot. It is only 9%. We would want to defend these sectors from changes in the future, because here we are very, very dominant. The second few sectors will be sectors where the export share will be reasonable, right? Employment share will be high. Labor intensive, that means they give more employment. Lower productivity, that means contribution to GDP will be lesser, right? But export potential is high. What are these? Trade and repair services, transportation, education, financial services. And financial services is going to grow in the future, right? Look at their export shares. You will say actually minimal, but look at their contribution to GDP. GDP ka contribution is more than average. And look at their contribution to employment. Employment high, contribution to GDP not as high, that means low productivity. What do we want to do with these sectors? We want to accelerate them. Then you have sectors whose contribution to export is next to minimal, nahi hi hai, whose contribution to employment is slightly higher than their contribution towards GDP. These are underperforming sectors, but sectors which have a growth potential. Which ones are these? Travel, health, personal, culture and recreational services. This is basically spa, yoga, culture, वगैरह ये वो है, right? What do we want to do with these services? We want to transform them, right? Transform them into high productivity sectors. And the last are sectors which have been untapped by and large. Everything across these sectors will be low. Contribution to GDP, contribution to exports, contribution to employment. This is basically this chart. इस chart को मैंने table में बना दिया so that you can read it easily. Problems? इसके बाद economic survey start होता है, right? Do you understand now? Right? The need for structural transformation, the contribution of services across the globe, contribution of services in India, in terms of employment, in terms of GDP, in terms of exports. This year's economic survey has missed out on investments. I am guessing किसी और chapter में तो किया ही होगा. So investment is also one thing that you have to look out for, right? Now that you know that India में contribution of services to GDP is high, contribution of services to employment is not as high compared to the rest of the world, and contribution of services to exports is very, very lopsided towards two subsectors. In that light, now see which sectors amongst these did the economic survey talk about. किसकी बात करी है? सबकी तो of course बात नहीं करेगा. किन किन की बात करी है? उसमें से डेटा पॉइंट्स निकालिए एंड सोचिए इसमें से प्रीलिम्स का क्या सवाल बनता है. बट मेंस के सवाल बनते हैं जो अभी तक हमने पढ़ लिया उससे. ऑलराइट, ये मैंने स्ट्रैटेजी वगैरह लिख रखी है, क्या क्या स्ट्रैटेजी है इंडिया की. प्लीज लुक आउट फॉर दिस. अब हमारा होगा इकोनॉमिक सर्वे चालू, राइट? The economic survey has been disappointing this year because it only gives you a status update कि last year से इस साल हमने इन subsectors में क्या क्या किया. It does not give you any analysis, right? That analysis was necessary for you because you need to know कि हम services में कहाँ हैं. उसके बाद तो तुम appreciate कर पाओगे this data points. Look at this, progress in logistics and physical connectivity based services. Whatever I have highlighted in yellow are things that you should read time and time again. बार बार पढ़ना so that जब आप prelims लिखोगे आपको जब numbers दिखेंगे maybe something hits you, right? याद तो नहीं कर पाओगे but फिर भी कोशिश करना जरूर. In the Indian Railways, what has been highlighted? Indian Railways is the fourth largest rail network across the world. This is a data point that they may straight up ask you a question on. Passenger traffic in India has grown since the last year. Not as important from prelims perspective क्योंकि ये एक साल का year on year increase दिखा रहा है. Freight traffic, which is say revenue earning freight, has also increased, right? But passenger traffic has increased more than freight traffic. Initiatives which have been mentioned in the economic survey, upgradation of passenger amenities, because railways will be connected to two things, travel and transport both, passenger traffic and also freight traffic. So what are we doing? We are investing in upgradation of passenger amenities. You would have seen, right? Railways का थोड़ा बहुत beautification हो रहा है, escalators लगते हैं, train indication boards लग रहे हैं, digital clocks लग रही हैं, televisions लग रहे हैं, right? This is to make them a little better in terms of servicing your passengers, because we are expecting in the future tourism is going to rise, travel is going to rise, right? You might want to give better amenities to your passengers. This is one. Second, e-ticketing has touched 86% in the reserved sector. That means coaches which are reserved, usme maximum tickets are getting, you will say people are booking those tickets online. 86% of 100 tickets, agar 100 tickets book ho rahi hain reserved coaches mein, 86 ho rahi hain online, IRCTC, right? And unreserved sector mein 33% of them are getting reserved online. Dynamic QR code based payment solutions, we have started offering it across all railway stations. And it also mentions something called Bharat Gaurav trains. What are Bharat Gaurav trains? Service provider managed theme based tourist circuit trains. What is a circuit train? A circuit train would be, it starts from point A, it covers B, C, D, E, and F, and comes back to point A. And in the process, A, B, C, D, E, and F back to A will all be some places which are going to showcase India's heritage. Now, in these trains, it's not just that the trains are going to provide you a travel service. It's going to be a comprehensive service. That means travel, accommodation, meals, local sightseeing, tour guides, everything included, right? There are private parties also which participate in these trains. Right? They mentioned Bharat Gaurav trains. Maybe they ask you straight up what are Bharat Gaurav trains. I'm guessing they will not. Right? इतना तो नहीं पूछेंगे, तो दिख ही जाता है भारत गौरव ट्रेन क्या होता होगा, right? कई बार ना जस्ट आपको व्हेन यू लुक एट दीज वर्ड्स, भारत गौरव का मतलब क्या है, इंडिया की हेरिटेज, राइट? ट्रेन का मतलब क्या है, क्या ही हो सकती है ये, राइट? अ ट्रेन विच इज गोइंग टू शोकेस योर हेरिटेज. This common sense has to be developed. Then is in terms of road transport. In terms of our multimodal transport connectivity, the highest share is road transport, dominated by road. Across the transport sector, 78% of GVA is contributed by road transport. What is the government focusing on? Enhancing user convenience. How? Barrier-free tolling, FASTag. Also, see, likha hua, barrier-free tolling on all 4-lane plus highways and high-speed corridors by 2029. Plan to establish more than 1,000 wayside amenities. का मतलब क्या है? When you go across these high-speed highways, right? In कहीं पे रोक के तुम्हें ऐसे food courts इस type की कुछ amenities दी जाएंगी. जैसे if you go to Kashmir, and there is this tunnel. इस tunnel के अंदर ही there are so many, you can say, shops you can stop by, and वहाँ पर तुम खा सकते हो. ये roadside amenities, and this is being planned. Right? This is upgradation of service provisioning. Road safety, cashless treatment scheme for road accident victims. What does the government do here? Within 24 hours, if an accident has been reported to the police, the government is going to bear your you can say treatment costs up to 1.5 lakh, right? Or which emerge up to 7 days, whichever is lower basically. Setting up of the Institute of Driving Training and Research and Abhay project. Abhay project is basically for vision correction of truck drivers. So the names have to be remembered. जो मैंने yellow में रखा हुआ है, please remember and read these names multiple times. कभी जब आप exam में आएगा, it will strike you. Across aviation, this is important. India is the fastest growing aviation market globally. Fastest growing का मतलब ये नहीं, we are not the biggest. We are growing the fastest, right? The PM Gati Shakti initiative. What is PM Gati Shakti initiative? If anybody knows this. Yes, this is basically breaking silos between multiple departments, right? Which is to say, in infrastructure projects, roughly around 16 ministries are involved. Now, each ministry works in silos. They have no idea about what the other ministry is doing, which hurts project implementation. More specifically, leads to cost overruns because timelines get distorted, right? So for that, there is a Gati Shakti portal. Gati Shakti portal is where all clearances are going to happen in the same place. That means no ministry will be a stumbling block towards infrastructure projects. That is the initiative. The PM Gati Shakti initiative brings together 16 ministries for integrated planning and implementation of infrastructure projects. You should know this, important. New segments, right, which is to say the planning commission, the economic survey mentions about this. Drones are the new segment. Drones what the government is trying to do is they're trying to encourage drone manufacturers to at least set up maintenance, leasing, maintenance, repair, and overhaul operations in India. Manufacture karo to karo, at least repair, maintenance and overhaul facilities, MRO services, ये कम से कम आप इंडिया में दो. The government is trying to encourage that. The government is also promoting domestic manufacturing of drones through the PLI scheme, Production Linked Incentive Scheme. But for other manufacturers, they are trying to say, कम से कम maintenance, repair and overhaul services इंडिया में देना चालू करो. Right? You have to remember this. Move to ports, waterways and shipping. Capacity enhancement is the major objective across major ports of India. Why? Because you want to be a dominant player in world trade. You want to become a hub for shipments to go through you, right? At least towards the Middle Eastern nations. India aims to position India's shipbuilding and ship repair amongst the top 5 globally. For that, we have what is called the Maritime India Vision, Maritime Amrit Kal Vision 2047, which is an initiative of which ministry? These are the kind of questions they may ask you in prelims, right? Know about what the Maritime India Vision is going to be and Maritime India Amrit Kal 2047, this is going to be. मैंने लिख के यहाँ पर रख रखा है, targets क्या हैं, right? सारे तो याद नहीं कर पाओगे, but at least कुछ तो याद कर लेना इसमें से. Inland water transport holds great untapped potential, and remember this, transport through waterways is far cheaper compared to transport through road or even through rail or even through air. Right, far cheaper, and India has a navigable length of roughly around 14,500 kilometers, out of which 5,000 kilometers inland waterways are now navigable, but still a great potential which is untapped, right? So this is going to be a priority sector for us in the times to come. The total navigable length is 14,850, and we have operational waterways somewhere around 5,000 kilometers. Government is also putting in efforts towards promoting river cruise tourism. कि tourism भी इसी लगे हाथों कर लो, right? Okay. Now some data points which are not mentioned in the economic survey, but I thought you should know that what is the relevant report. The relevant report is World Bank's Logistics Performance Index, where across one category India performed well. Which was this category? This is international shipment category. यहाँ पर इंडिया ने थोड़ा अच्छा perform किया है, right? Not across the entire index, but across one category, 100%. Total traffic handled in the Indian ports has increased of late. 12 major Indian ports handled 54% of India's total cargo in 2019-20. Right? So you have roughly around 12 major ports, more than 200 minor ports. तुम्हारे जो major ports हैं, 12 ही हैं. They are dealing with 54% of your total cargo shipments. Cost effective, which I've also mentioned it here itself, that according to World Bank, inland waterways are 60% cheaper than road and transport, and 20 to 30% cheaper than rail transport. So in terms of cost, cheapest are waterways. Also fuel efficient, right? This is data points that is interesting for you to remember. इतना पता रहना चाहिए. But across tourism and hospitality, the tourism sector's contribution to GDP has regained pre-pandemic levels. Quite obviously, in pandemic, it would have suffered because the world was now closed. It has now opened up. We have regained tourism ka growth to 5%. The tourism sector created 7.6 crore jobs. Now remember this, in terms of contribution to GDP, not as high, but in terms of labor or in terms of employment, quite a significant sector for us. The share of India's international tourist arrivals in world tourist arrivals stands at a 1.45%. That means across the world, jitne bhi international tourist arrival events hote hain, uska 1.45% happen in India. Foreign exchange earning is roughly around 28 billion US dollars. Why? Because tourism is going to be exports, basically. If a person comes to India, that is export. Right? Do you know that? I'm hoping. Right? India received 1.8% of the world tourism receipts, and these are just data points that you have to just look at. Right? Real estate. Two things in India. Real estate has witnessed a boom, both across commercial spaces and also across your households. Right? Office demands and residential sales, right? Which is say you will want a building to be constructed primarily to set up an office or to set up a shopping mall or to set up a hospital. That is the commercial use of that building. The other is for you to live in. Both these kinds of sales have improved, right? Commercial may be improved and residential may be improved. Kyun? Primarily because of market sentiments. Market sentiments have improved, especially since 2016, because that is the time when we set up Real Estate Act 2016, under which you have this authority called RERA, right? Real Estate Regulatory Authority. Since 2016, the sentiment amongst people has been high towards real estate in the country. If you have had any relatives, बहुत सारे लोगों के कुछ relatives ऐसे होते हैं जिन्होंने कुछ ना कुछ पैसा डुबाया होगा, right? किसी ना किसी construction firm में. Usually, what used to happen was, these people will tell you that this is our project plan. यहाँ पर हम ज़मीन खरीदने वाले हैं, right? तो सब लोग पैसा pool करिए, CGHS societies, and we are going to set up this, and eventually we are going to give you possession, right? Real estate in India was not a standardized market, right? Standardized nahi tha, right? Koi statutory backing bhi nahi hai, right? In which case, lots of people will give you the money, right? The project, they will never be able to buy the land. The project is never going to be started, or if the project is started midway, the project will be left incomplete, right? You will have to wait 20 years, 30 years of possession. That was a common phenomenon, right? This hurt market sentiment, more specifically amongst people, right? Post your Real Estate Act 2016, the sentiments have been positive. Why? Because the Real Estate Act has done something. One, makes registration mandatory, right? Which is to say all construction projects have to be registered before you advertise them. When you register them, you have to give them project details ka complete disclosure, which will include land ka status kya hai, layout plans tumhare kya hai, construction timelines kya hongi. Then there is a 70-30% fund utilization. That means the money that you pool from people, 70% of this money has to go only towards construction or acquisition of land. 30% you can use in allied activities, jahan ko promote kar sakte ho, kuch kar lo, but 70% of the money that you get from people has to only go towards construction. This is safeguarding consumer rights. Advance payment limits, which is to say, before you sign a sale agreement with a person, you cannot take more than 10% of the sale value as advance, right? This is a restriction imposed on real estate developers. And then you have a real estate regulatory authority, against which, if you want to file an appeal, there is also an appellate authority. This was the intervention which created positive market sentiments, and hence both residential and commercial sales have seen a boom. Right? Now this demand is not emerging only from tier 1 cities, it is coming from tier 1, tier 2 cities, but across the other states too. Why? Because there has been improvement in metro networks, there have been improvement in road networks, and also improvements in connectivity. So there has been generally a rising demand in terms of commercial as well as residential housing units. Now, I've mentioned other things too. There is something called REIT, which is called a Real Estate Investment Trust. Do you know what an REIT is? Some of you who have written this exam previously would also know this. There is Infrastructure Investment Trust, there is Real Estate Investment Trust. This is basically mutual funds for real estate, which is to say you don't want to buy a real land, you don't want to buy a commercial space, right? What you would want to do is you'll want to pool this money into a real estate developer, or a fund rather, who's going to be investing across these projects, right? Basically, जैसे तुम gold नहीं खरीदते हो, तुम gold bond खरीदते हो. Same thing here, कि तुम property नहीं खरीद रहे हो, तुम एक financial instrument खरीद रहे हो, or you're pooling in your money. There is this expert who is going to be investing in infrastructure projects. Their income will be derived from whatever capital gains they make from those investment projects, and that money will be distributed to you. That is the real estate investment trusts, which have been coming about in India. They facilitate more liquidity into this market. Right? Then there is GST. GST has standardized taxation across real estate in the country, and also digitization platforms, which has held positive market sentiments. Information technology and services, IT services. यहाँ पर आता है तुम्हारे पास software development. Revenues of 254 billion, exports have nearly reached 200 billion, 3.8% ka increase. Domestic market is expected to cross 54 billion. When you look at this, exports are 200 billion, domestic markets are 54 billion. That means most of these services are geared towards exports. These companies are not manufacturing, they're not producing these services primarily for India, for domestic demand, they're mainly making it for the world demand, which is why protectionism across the world is going to hurt them so much more, right? Workforce is only 5.43 million in financial year 24. You have to remember this, because I know for a fact, since you don't look at it in a very disaggregated manner, you will think that IT services is the be-all and end-all of it. No, it's not. In terms of value addition, yes. In terms of exports, yes. In terms of employment, no. Right? What were the favorable things? One is the abolition of angel tax. What do you know? Do you know what an angel tax is? Yes, if you are a startup, if you are a business, when you raise funds from angel investors, right, this realization of funds was also taxed, which is quite stupid from the government. That you are raking in money, you are getting investors to pool in money into your business venture. This is not your revenue. This is essentially your investment. The government used to tax this investment also. This obviously will dissuade both the startups and also private investors who would want to invest in high-stake ventures. Right? This angel tax has now been abolished. Second is expanding the scope of safe harbor rules for transfer pricing. Do you know what transfer pricing is? There is something called base erosion and profit shifting, BEPS. Base erosion and profit shifting ka matlab kya? That companies, what they do is, They will have subsidiaries. Imagine there is a company which manufactures, let's say, televisions, right? Now, it has operations in country A and country B. From country A, it has a subsidiary. The subsidiary sells it software. And country B, they manufacture this TV, right? Now, when company A sells software to its own subsidiary in country B, right, they may price this lower than what they price it for other companies, which is to say, the same software is not sold only to my parent company. I sell the software to other TV manufacturers also. When I sell them my software, I sell them at, let's say, ₹1,000. But when I sell my software to company B, which is my parent company, I sell it at ₹10. Why do I do it? I do it because I want to show lower revenues here, and I want to show higher revenues here, right? If I'm reducing my price for this, I'm showing lower revenues here. That is the gain of my subsidiary. Why am I showing lower revenues here and higher revenues here? Because in here, the taxation rate could be high. And here, the taxation could be low. This is base erosion and profit shifting. For that, the safeguarding mechanism is transfer pricing, which is to say, the subsidiary A has to announce as to what price is it going to sell its software, not just to its subsidiary, across related parties, right? Which is to say, there has to be parity. If it is selling the software at ₹10 to its own subsidiary, it cannot be selling it at more than 10 to other companies, right? Or if it is selling it at 1,000 to other companies, it cannot be selling it at less than 1,000 to this company. That is called transfer pricing. What has happened in the case of India is there are something called safe harbor rules, which is say there are some conditions. If you satisfy those conditions, your transfer prices are readily admitted by your customs department here. Right? This is a relaxation which has been granted.
Do you find yourself alone in the revision process for UPSC Prelims? Do not succumb to the pressure. Instead, make revision your strength with the specifically curated Quick Revision Classes 2025. Starting from 5th February at 1 p.m., the classes help you align your strategy with complete revision assistance, offering 40 classes to cover important general studies subjects in a short and crisp format. Quick revision material for each subject for ease in revision. Focus on core subjects such as polity, economy, history, and more. Integrated assessment with one-on-one feedback to address weak areas and build over strengths. Ease in revision with a personalized student portal and access to live and online classes. Gear up and back your preparation for prelim success using strong revision and recall strategy. Prelims is knocking at your doorstep. Are you ready to conquer it heads-on? Do not let the paucity of time determine your success in UPSC Prelims 2025. Fast-pace your preparation with the fast-track course offering coverage of syllabus ranging from polity, economy, geography, environment, international relations, science and technology, art and culture, and Indian history. Starting fresh or looking for revision guidance, Fast-Track course has got you covered. Enroll for coverage of GS Prelims syllabus, personalized mentoring, current affairs preparation, sectional mini tests, access to live and online classes. Admission to the course is now open.
Revolutionize your current affairs preparation with the VisionIS digital current affairs platform. This all-in-one platform ensures smarter, faster and more effective current affairs preparation. With VisionIS Digital Current Affairs Premium, you get visual intelligence. Get AI-powered answers to your current affairs queries, instant and tailored to the syllabus. Daily answer writing. Refine your mains preparation with expert feedback on structured answers. Quick notes and highlights. Simplify note-taking and create personalized revision materials for quick access. Free features include daily news summaries, curated from trusted sources like The Hindu and Indian Express to save you hours. Downloadable PDFs. Keep resources organized for easy revision. Daily quizzes. Test yourself with MCQs that track your progress. Student dashboard. Monitor performance and stay on track with your goals. From reading and testing through revision, Vision IS Digital Current Affairs is your one-stop solution for mastering current affairs. Visit our website today and transform your preparation journey.
Just say this avoids a lot of litigation between your income tax authorities and also these foreign companies. There is this abolition of 2% equalization levy. Remember, 6% on online sales. In fact, ad revenues is still there. This is for e-commerce. 2% के equalization levy जो लगाई जाती थी. Do you know what an equalization levy is? It's not a tax on tax. It's actually a tax only. Yes. A foreign company making incomes from another company, for example, a company based in US, Meta, makes revenues from Indian users, right? Why? Because an Indian advertiser wants to sell an advert to an Indian user here. So the advertiser is the Indian. The person who's going to watch this ad is also going to be an Indian. But this income will be showed by Meta, where? In the US. So this income will be taxed in the US. Right? This is income generated from another country. The other country is not taxing it. Who is taxing it? The parent country. Right? There has to be some equalization, which is to say, the government is then going to impose a tax which is called an equalization levy. This equalization levy is primarily of the nature of a direct tax itself. Right? कौन लगाएगा? हमारी सरकार लगाएगी. There are two slabs here, 6% and 2%. 6% is for online ads. 2% used to be for e-commerce operators. This has now been, the 2% has now been abolished, which is a favorable condition that we are creating for them. Apart from this, reduction in tax deduction at source, reduction in rate of tax collection at source, collected by e-commerce. Remember, there's a difference between TDS and TCS. Tax deducted at source का मतलब क्या है? When the e-commerce operator is giving income to some person. Some part of this income has to be deducted as tax by this e-commerce operator and given to who? Given to the government. What is TCS? Tax collected as source is this the seller is going to collect some part of this revenue, right, on behalf of the government, which is say GST जब आपसे लिया जाता है, GST collect करेगा कौन? The seller, right, and it is going to give this to who? To the government. That's TCS, and when the seller gives income, right, that's going to be TDS. We have reduced both of them, right? This has been mentioned in the economic survey. Is it important from your exam perspective? Not as much. You should know at least what an equalization levy is. Has this been abolished or not? You should know what a angel tax is. Maybe you should know what transfer pricing is. That's about it. Right? Remember GCCs I told you about. What are GCCs essentially? Previously, multinational companies would only outsource support functions. Support functions का मतलब क्या? Core functions नहीं, support functions. And why would they outsource support functions? For example, my computer has gone bad, right? I bought it from HP, but HP has a support function somewhere in India. So there will be a call center here where there will be an Indian employee listening to a foreigner making complaint about this HP ka laptop. Now this is a support function. It's not the core function of HP. Core function of HP was to make those laptops. A support function which has been outsourced in these destinations. Why? Because people here speak English and they will be far cheaper because there are minimum wage rates in the US also. So they will be outsourcing it. This used to be called business process outsourcing, where support functions were outsourced to other countries. From BPOs, it increased to what is called KPOs, which was what is in normal terms called value chain mein moving up, right? KPOs का मतलब क्या? Not just these ordinary support functions, some amount of more value addition, which is says people who are a little bit more skilled, people who are skilled in terms of dealing with data, looking at data, understanding it also. From KPOs, now you have what is called GCCs. GCCs का मतलब क्या है? In these geographies, much like India, there is a huge amount of STEM workforce who is also going to be cheaper, right? This is quite a skilled workforce who could be leveraged in the higher end of the value chain also. They're not here only for support functions. They can do analytics for me also. They can do data science for me also. Right? They can be involved in engineering. They can be involved in architectural designs also, while they remain offshore. Right? ये यहीं रहेंगे, यहीं से service देंगे because it's going to be cheaper for us. That is what is called GCC. नाम बदल दिया है. It's basically पुरानी शराब, नई बोतलें. Right? Nothing very significant. It's just GCCs और जिसको आप बोल दोगे global capability centers. Right? थोड़ा बहुत telecom का भी लिखा हुआ था. It stands, India stands second largest telecommunications market in the world. By what? By subscribers. Overall tele density of 84%, which is the largest market. The largest is China, right? Country also leads in mobile data consumption per subscriber, right? Of course, on the back of Jio. India's achievement of the fastest 5G rollout globally, right? So these are data points you have to remember. Fastest 5G rollout, second largest telecommunications market, roughly numbers in terms of subscribers, and you should also know in terms of data consumption per user, India would be the highest, right? This is number of telephones per 1,000 population, right? The average monthly wireless data user has grown. This is basically numbers that you can commonsensically also tell, right? India has the cheapest broadband plans. India has the cheapest mobile data plans also. Quite obviously, if you have such cheap mobile plans, plus you have a subscriber base of more than 900 million people, average data consumption per person is also going to increase. कोई भी इंसान आजकल 1 से 2 GB तो consume करता ही है दिन का, right? This is the numbers. It's not going to be antithetical to what you believe, right? अगर आपको लगता है कि इंडिया में टेली डेंसिटी हाईएस्ट होगी, मोस्ट लाइकली सेकंड हाईएस्ट होगी. इंडिया में मंथली वायरलेस डेटा यूज सबसे हाईएस्ट होगा, यस होगा. व्हाई? बिकॉज द चीपेस्ट डेटा रेट्स अक्रॉस द वर्ल्ड, राइट? There was a dabba in the middle which was about C-DOT. What does C-DOT do? Please read it up, right? And intrastate comparison also, right? This is, they may ask you because the डब्बों से वो लोग straight up question पूछ लेते हैं कि C-DOT है क्या चीज़, C-DOT करता क्या है, right? This is Center for Development of Telematics. It helps in your telecommunication segment. What does it do? It was instrumental in developing your 4G and 5G के core solutions indigenously. That means you did not have to depend upon imports of the same, right? So reduces your import burden. It helps in quantum encryption services also, which is mostly for strategic spheres. It has also led to early warning alerts जो आपको आते होंगे आजकल मैसेज से पहले. आपने नोटिस किया होगा कई बार कि earthquake आ गया या फिर winds तेज होने वाली हैं. That is basically C-DOT doing it, right? Then your C-DOT has developed indigenous cybersecurity tools. Just एक status mentioning of C-DOT करता क्या है, right? State up पूछ भी सकते हैं because वो डब्बों से सवाल पूछते हैं. And then you have interstate comparison. There are states which have high per capita industrial gross state value added. That means in industry is the dominant sector. There are states which have a strong service sector performance. There are states which have dual strengths. That means both industry as well as services. And then there are states with reform potential. मैंने हाईलाइट कर दी हुई हैं कौन सी ऐसी स्टेट्स हैं जिनमें इंडस्ट्रियल परफॉर्मेंस स्ट्रॉन्ग. गुजरात, उत्तराखंड एंड हिमाचल. हिमाचल में बद्दी की तरफ फार्मास्यूटिकल मैन्युफैक्चरिंग थोड़ी हाई है. स्ट्रॉन्ग सर्विस सेक्टर परफॉर्मेंस कौन कौन है? जस्ट रिमेंबर दीज नेम्स: कर्नाटका, तेलंगाना एंड केरला. डुअल स्ट्रेंथ्स का मतलब क्या है कि दोनों, राइट? डुअल स्ट्रेंथ्स कौन कौन से हैं? प्राइमरली महाराष्ट्र एंड तमिलनाडु, राइट? और तुम्हारे बाकी स्टेट्स विद रिफॉर्म पोटेंशियल. सो जस्ट रिमेंबर दो नाम होते हैं, ज़्यादा नहीं आपको याद रखने. किसकी इंडस्ट्री स्ट्रांग है, किसकी सर्विसेज स्ट्रांग है, किसका दोनों स्ट्रांग है. दोनों स्ट्रांग वाली दो ही स्टेट्स हैं, महाराष्ट्र एंड तमिलनाडु. अगर आपको ऑप्शन में कर्नाटका दिखता है तो कर्नाटका वुड मोस्ट लाइकली भी सर्विसेज, राइट? क्योंकि कर्नाटका में पूरी सॉफ्टवेयर इंडस्ट्री वहीं तो बैठी हुई है बैंगलोर में. एंड यू शुड कुछ कम से कम कॉमन सेंसिकली यू हैव टू प्लॉट देम. लास्ट इज समथिंग कॉल्ड BRAP, बिजनेस रिफॉर्म्स एक्शन प्लान, राइट? DPIIT क्या है? DPIIT पता है? डिपार्टमेंट फॉर Information, Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade, right? This department provides what is called a BRAP, Business Reform Action Plan, which is basically a consolidated index that rates states' ka performance in terms of their business reforms, which is what are states doing towards ease of doing business. It rates states. According to BRAP, states which have dual strengths are states which have had ease of business doing reforms. And this is what they have said. States with service intensity backed by industry, which have a dual strength, are the states which have introduced larger number of reforms in comparison to their peer states. That's all about services. When you read the economic survey, it will only tell you about these data points. These data points you will not be able to place in your head unless you know the importance of services across the world and the importance of services for India. Good enough? How do you use them? Imagine what kind of questions will they ask you in mains. The questions in mains are not going to be about a specific scheme. बता दो C-DOT क्या करता है? No. They're not going to be asking you straight up about IT, ITS, बताओ क्या करता है? Not so much. They're going to be asking you broader questions. Right? Has structural transformation been complete? Is service the reliable sector over which India's growth or future growth may be dependent? What about what I'm expecting could be servicification of manufacturing? Has India integrated its services across the global manufacturing? What are the possible challenges? What are the possible potential outcomes? These are the broader questions that they will ask you on services. In prelims, however, everything that I've highlighted in yellow, you read them multiple times, and then what you do is you only attempt questions basis this, right? The more you read it, the more frequently you read it, chances are some of these numbers are going to stick to you. So you don't have to remember everything, at least those things which I've highlighted in yellow, right? Repeat them multiple times before you write your first test. Okay? Next will be agriculture. We'll take a short break and then we'll take agriculture. The same way I'm going to talk about agriculture, which is going to be, I'm going to give you a broad context over agriculture in India. What are the broader problems, right? And where does the economic survey, or what points does the economic survey bring to the fore? Okay? Any problems? Understanding this? अब कोई जिसको question पूछना पूछ सकता है? हाँ जी. हाँ नहीं पढ़ना है. इसको पढ़ने के बाद. I don't understand why people don't read the economic survey. It's the best source for you. Whatever you read in class is your static knowledge. It is the best source for you to understand what has happened in the last year. The economic survey does not tell you about the entire economy. सब कुछ नहीं बताता वो. Right? The things that it mentions, especially in boxes, are things which are going to be high priority areas for you. But of course, for you to read the economic survey and make sense out of it, you have to have some literacy. थोड़ा बहुत पता होना चाहिए कि इसका meaning क्या होता है. Right? Then it will help you so much more. Right? इसको पढ़ने के बाद नहीं पढ़ने का. At least ये दो chapters. I cannot say about the other ones, but हाँ. ये तो ढूंढ लेना है Google करके. High per capita नहीं, this is industrial. हाँ, industrial output is higher. We can have a balance. I mean, that's the argument of Dr. Rajan. Dr. Rajan's balance is basically this, that the East Asian economies have done what they have done in case of manufacturing. Right? You focus on services more specifically. Why do you have to have a balance? The idea is to have greater output per person. Now that output could come from agriculture, the output could come from services, the output could come from manufacturing. It doesn't really matter. What are your comparative strengths? That is. Mm-hmm. They will have a dominance if they have that high-skilled workforce, which is also. Why would you want to have a balance? Look at the rich countries of the world. Do they have a balance? And balance in terms of what? In terms of contribution to GDP, services is dominant. In terms of employment, services is dominant. Are the rich countries of the world balanced? Why do you need balance? You need greater productivity given the resources. What are your resources? Labor. Labor is a resource. And if the world is moving towards high value addition, stronger technology, you skill your workforce. That has been your advantage, right? Yes, you have to also realize the untapped potential of manufacturing, which was basically the casualty caused by the model of growth that we followed, right? There's so much to do there, but across services also, you'll have to focus on skilling and upskilling your workforce, because they are going to stand to lose, right? If there is going to be a battle in AI, in the field of LLMs, in the field of deep tech, is India prepared for that or not? You'll have to prepare yourself. You have excellent workforce. Your people are making perplexity in the US. Are they not? Get this? Okay. Any questions that you have? For example, you asked me about why is the government focusing more on manufacturing? I asked you, how do you know the government is focusing more on manufacturing? It's not. It's focusing across the board. Right? You have three sectors: agriculture, industry, services. Industry mein one part is manufacturing. Agriculture is agriculture and allied. Right? There are many things. Primary sector mein aur bhi cheezein aati hain. Right? In agriculture, you have 45% of your workforce. You have 31% of your workforce in services, right? Which is combined 76% of your workforce. That means roughly 24% would be in industry, of which a proportion, roughly around 20% would be in manufacturing, right? The story of your structural transformation has been such that you skipped the middle part, which was you first explode your manufacturing. The manufacturing share of employment should have increased. Its share in the output should have increased before you moved over to services. That if you went by what was the growth template across the world. The West did it first. It was replicated by East Asian economies, replicated far more efficiently by China also, right? The West took somewhere around 200 to 300 years to achieve this structural transformation. The East Asian economies did this in a matter of 2 to 3 odd decades. How did they do it in a matter of 2 to 3 odd decades? They said, no. They said, you don't want to be focusing on domestic demand only. That if I move to manufacturing, right, and my manufacturing is catering to my domestic demand only, then this structural transformation is going to take a lot of time. Right? So for us, what we should do is, we should integrate ourselves with the world. Let us manufacture for the already rich countries. Now for the already rich countries, there would be some goods and services which will be highly tech intensive, some which will not be very tech intensive, which is what you call low-end manufacturing. Toys, you would have seen toys being mentioned in the current budget. Textile manufacturing, this is low-end manufacturing. Most of the groundwork in terms of technology was already done by the wealthy countries. So what these East Asian economies have to do is they have to either buy these technologies, they have to rent these technologies, or collaborate with the rest of the world, right? What was their advantage? Their advantage in low-end manufacturing was that they have plenty of labor, which is willing to work for far lesser rates compared to labor getting in the West. So their advantage, comparative advantage, is labor price arbitrage, wage rates ka jo arbitrage hai. That is their advantage. They start from low-end manufacturing, but low-end manufacturing not targeted only towards the domestic markets, also towards the rest of the world, wherein it will be very expensive for the world countries, for the developed countries of the world, to be manufacturing, let's say, shirts, to be manufacturing belts, to be manufacturing shoes, right? Because it's going to be high cost for them. Their workers are paid more, right? So they first start with domestic manufacturing. As their factory owners become wealthier, then the moment you become wealthier, your risk appetite also increases. That means if you have too much capital, now you can risk that capital too. From low-end manufacturing, they move to high-end manufacturing, and high-end manufacturing once again targeted towards exports. The growth of China is on the back of SEZs, special economic zones meant primarily for exports. Why exports? Because if their manufacturing industry has to survive the test of time, it should be competitive across the globe. Only those industries should survive which are competitive in the world markets. That means these industries will have to innovate. Whatever they innovate through, domestic innovation, great. If you can't, then buy that technology. If you can't buy that technology, rent it. If you can't rent it, steal it. This is what they did, right? They would buy, beg, borrow, steal, and then they have moved gradually from low-end manufacturing to high-end manufacturing before their services picked up, right? Picked up the momentum that it has currently seen. This is what happened across the world. So integration of an economy with the rest of the world is also very, very important, because you don't want to grow only on the basis of domestic demand, right? Now the world economies are much more open. You would also want to target world markets. For India, what has happened is our services are heavily lopsided. Yes, they contribute great towards our exports, but not all services. And one thing about services that you should know is that it's not just high-skilled services. Services are also at a low-skill spectrum also. The more your manufacturing would have grown, there would have been demand for both high-end and low-end skilled services also, right? What happened was you missed that bus. You straight up moved from agriculture to services, precisely because it was also circumstantial, right? You liberalized your economy not by design, but by compulsion, right? You were forced to liberalize your economy, right? So your transformation was rather lopsided. Now that your current structure is such that you are dominant in terms of services, you are dominant in terms of agriculture, not as much in terms of manufacturing, why would you not want to focus on manufacturing? Because that is potential which has not been realized. And since there is greater servicification of manufacturing, that means services where you're already very competitive could also be leveraged by your own manufacturing, right? So there is so many more jobs to be created there, which remained, you would say, unprepared, or which were never created. So why would you not want to realize your manufacturing potential in the services spectrum, since you see that your growth is very lopsided towards two service subsectors, and those service subsectors are now threatened because of deep tech, right? So you would want to be defending those by investing in deep tech, by having very, very high-skilled workforce and also retaining that workforce within the country. You would want to do that. there are many other sectors where the potential has not been realized, many sectors which need to be transformed. And in the chart that I've given you, right, if you have to have a comprehensive answer, I have mentioned for each sector, what is the government targeting, right? These will be sectors to defend, where you are dominant already. What are we going to do in these sectors? Sectors which you have to accelerate. How will you accelerate these sectors? Because there is potential still left to be tapped. Sectors which you want to transform completely. How are you going to go about transforming these sectors? And sectors which are untapped, how do you consolidate these sectors? This is your route map. Why would you not want to concentrate on services? Of course you will have to, right? Remember, this is a very common phenomenon. People think that we are service-led. That means हम बस service ही करते हैं और कुछ नहीं करते. You do everything, right? You have 3 sectors. All these sectors have to grow. In the economic survey, you're looking at what are we doing in agriculture, what are we doing in services, what are we doing in manufacturing, right? But the backstory you should know already before you read the economic survey. That is the expectation for you to realize the most out of your economic surveys. Get this? Next sector is agriculture. It'll be speedy. Why will it be speedy? Because I'm assuming that you know more about agriculture than you know about services. I know for a fact that services is one thing that is brushed aside. We think services mein everything is good. It's not. It's a very, very complicated sector. Right? In agriculture, I'm guessing most of you would know stuff. Services I wanted to delegate more time to also, because people's understanding of services is rather poor. Get this? Lots of people think the services are not labor intensive. They are. Some of them are really labor intensive. Some of them are not, clearly. Right? Anyway, agriculture and food management, sector of the future. Once again, like I said, I will begin with context setting, which is what are the broader problems of agriculture in the country. I think that will help you understand this economic survey better. Firstly, what kind of agriculture did we inherit around the time of independence? We were a subsistence economy. Remember, subsistence economy का मतलब क्या है? That we are barely producing enough for our own sustenance. From subsistence economy, which has more than 2/3 of your workforce, which is to say roughly around 70% of your workforce is involved in agriculture. First requirement was for us to be food sufficient. From self-sufficiency, we have now become a food surplus nation. On the back of what? On the back of green revolution. Food self-sufficient and food surplus nation. Now, green revolution leveraged what is called high yielding varieties program, also called the SFT technology, the seed fertilizer technology. One important characteristic of green revolution is that it is very input intensive. That means these seeds require assured irrigation, these seeds require heavy dosage of fertilizers and also pesticides. Now, very, very poor farmers, how are you going to have these poor farmers shift to an input intensive agriculture? This is going to take money. Right? You want better seeds, you want assured irrigation, you want fertilizer use, you want pesticides use. How do you make sure that your poor farmers transfer over to this kind of agriculture now, input intensive agriculture? Through support. There was governmental support which was absolutely necessary. This support is both in terms of inputs, also in terms of output. For poor farmers to take up a kind of agriculture which is going to be input intensive, quite obviously the government has to help them out. Help them out both in terms of input and also in terms of output. Why in terms of input? Because that is going to be cost to them. How do you support your farmers in terms of inputs? Broadly through many types of subsidies. Fertilizer, power, credit, and also insurance, irrigation. Heavily subsidize these inputs for your farmers. आउटपुट में सपोर्ट क्यों चाहिए? Why would you want support for farmers in the output spectrum? Now that you can produce more, why don't you just sell it? There is no guarantee that if I produce more, this produce will also be lifted in the market. Right? And if it does not get lifted in the market, then it's one, I will have to have space where I store this produce. It is going to get rotten. All my investment is going to go to waste. Therefore, the government also has to come in towards output support too. What kind of output support do we give? Primarily two types. One is what you call price support, and the second is what you call market support. What do you mean by price support? Price support mein MSP is a part, remember. Price support is not just MSP. Price support ka meaning kya hai? If you produce more, right? Usually the demand in context of food items is not very income elastic. There is low income elasticity of demand. That means year on year, the demand for food items is not going to increase spectacularly. The demand is going to stay pretty much the same. If the supply increases because of better technology now, if the supply increases while demand remains the same, what is going to happen to the prices? The prices are now going to decline. Previously, this was the supply, now this is the supply. Demand pretty much stays the same or may have marginally increased. What is going to happen to the prices? Prices are going to decline. Now, there may be a scenario where the price that you get for your produce from the market is actually less than your cost of production. Less than your cost of production plus a reasonable profit margin. That is a scenario of what do we call price failure. The markets have failed you in terms of prices, right? The prices that you got for your produce are less than your cost of production plus some reasonable profit margin. In a scenario like this, the government has to intervene. The government intervenes through mechanisms which we call price support mechanisms. What are price support mechanisms? These are emergency mechanisms which will only be triggered in the event of a price failure. Price failure ka matlab kya? Where the market prices are less than your cost of production plus a reasonable profit margin. जब ये price failure होगा, तब government intervene करेगी. कैसे intervene करेगी? By buying your produce at a price which is called a support price. In your context, you call it MSP. That is the output support that the government provides. In addition, the government also provides market support. When you say market support, what does it mean? It regulates trade of farm produce. More specifically, regulates the wholesale trade of farm produce. There are what we call agriculture produce marketing legislations, APMLs, which regulate the trade in market produce. Yeah, this is the output support that we have. Now, the problem as happened in the case of India was, once you became self-sufficient or surplus, it did not mean that the food is going to be affordable for the people. Now remember, Green Revolution is in the planned holiday period, the HYE program, 1966 to 1969. Within 10 years, you were a food self-sufficient economy, and over the course of time, you also became a food surplus economy. But the food may not have been affordable for people, which is where your food policy came into being. Your food policy is not just about ensuring that you have enough food. Your food policy is also about making sure that this food is also affordable, which is to say food safety or nutritional safety as we now call it, right? That is also a critical component of your food policy. And this food security is guaranteed through the public distribution system. PDS undertook several changes. PDS turned into being TPDS. From TPDS, you had the NFSA. NFSA ने TPDS के साथ कुछ नहीं किया. NFSA ने TPDS को सिर्फ एक legal backing दी. The TPDS system in the country still exists. And under NFSA, we cover 75% of our rural population, 50% of our urban population. How? By providing them subsidized food grains. It is an indirect subsidy. Subsidized food grains का मतलब क्या? We'll provide them rice, wheat and coarse grains at ₹3, ₹2, ₹1 per kg. And there are entitlements which have been guaranteed by law now, 5 kgs per person per month. This means that the government has a huge food subsidy bill. यहाँ से food subsidy bill बढ़ेगा. The government also has a huge farm subsidy bill. Remember, farm subsidy and food subsidy are different. Do you know how much is the farm subsidies, or like which one are the biggest farm subsidies? Fertilizers and power, right? Fertilizers will be to the tune of 1.5 to 1.6 lakh crores. Power pe there are only estimates because we don't follow what is called volumetric pricing systems. But power is also estimated to be, if not more, then at least the same as fertilizer subsidies. Right? There are also other subsidies, credit subsidies, right, which are guaranteed through KCC नहीं. Credit subsidy क्या है? Credit subsidy is interest subventions. Interest subvention, prompt repayment incentives, that is the credit subsidy part. Insurance subsidy is shared equally between the center and the states. This is roughly going to be around 4 lakh crores. Food subsidy this year is going to be 4 lakh crores. You're spending 8 lakh crores on your farms. You're spending 8 lakh crores on agriculture and also food security combined. The government always has a limited kitty. If you're spending 8 lakh crores towards something that does not create any asset for you, what does it mean? It means that there will be one casualty. The casualty will be capital expenditure. Capital expenditure in agriculture will become a casualty. Why? Because the kind of expenditure that we have towards both farm and food subsidies, it is very, very high. Now, if capital expenditure suffers, that means what? That means, more specifically, public investment suffers. Right? That means what? That means agriculture is not going to be very productive in the country. Irrigation potential we have not realized. So much of it we have not realized. We're going to look at the numbers. We have not realized it. Right? Why? Because we are spending so much here. Right? Similarly, infrastructure, when it comes to storage infrastructure, when it comes to supply chain, we have not realized that. Why? Because you are spending so much here. If capex in agriculture suffers because of subsidy burden, that means agriculture is not going to be productive anymore. Productivity will be low. We are a high production, low productivity subsystem. That means we do make excess of 300 million tons of food grains, but for us to make those 300 million tons of food grains, we are using too many inputs, which is why our cost of those food grains is also very high, which is what makes our agri exports not very cost competitive. When your food produced lands on other shores, there is a lot of cost that has gone into making your food produce. It's not competitive compared to the rest of the world. Which is why, even though in production terms you may be high in top 10 across most categories, but in terms of exports you will not be in top 10. Why? Because it is input intensive. It is input intensive, you're producing more because you're using more inputs compared to it being productive. Why was agriculture not productive? Because capex in agriculture has suffered. More specifically, public investment in agriculture has suffered. Why? Because you spend too much towards subsidies. That is one. Regardless of this all, I would still want to say this is not the biggest problem that Indian agriculture is facing. The biggest problem that Indian agriculture is facing is 46% of your workforce is still stuck in agriculture. 46% of your workforce is still there. Your land reforms have spectacularly failed. Because your land reforms have spectacularly failed, the average land holding size in the country today is less than 1 hectare. 86% of your farmers are small and marginal. That means they hold land less than 2 hectares. Small is less than 2, marginal is less than 1 hectare. Right? Now, when you have small land holdings, what does it do towards productivity? It hurts productivity a lot. Why? Because you cannot scale it. One, you cannot mechanize it. Why can you not mechanize it? Imagine that you have a parcel of land which is 1 hectare, another person who has a parcel of land which is 100 hectares. Right? There are big landlords, there are small landlords. Now, in 1 hectare, you are producing, let's say, 50 kgs of bhindi. Right? If in 1 hectare you're producing 50 kgs of bhindi, 100 hectares you're going to be producing 5,000 kgs of bhindi. And remember, this land holding is by household. This household, over the course of the year, is going to probably use 30 kgs of this bhindi for their own self. That means their marketable surplus is only going to be 20 kgs. Itna hi surplus hai, itna hi बेच पाएंगे. This is also one family, right? चलो वो 30 किलो भिंडी नहीं खाते, वो 100 किलो खा लेते हैं, right? Remaining 4,900 is their marketable surplus. Who is going to be more likely to invest in a tractor? A tractor costs you roughly 10 lakh. मुझे नहीं पता कितने का होता, but इतने का तो होना ही चाहिए, right? Who is going to be more likely towards buying a tractor? A tractor may let's say induce productivity performance twice. If you have a tractor, you are going to be making not 5,000, you are going to be making 2x. If he has a tractor, he's not going to be making 50, he's going to be making it 2x. That means he's going to be making 100. This guy is going to be making 10,000 kgs. Who is going to be more likely to invest in a tractor? This guy. Why? Because out of this 10,000 kgs, he's going to eat only 100. What? 10,000 kilo to nahi khalega na? Khayega to itna hi. That means for him, the marketable surplus is not going to be 9,900 kgs. For him, the marketable surplus is going to be now how much? Only 70 kgs. अब 70 kg बेच के वो ट्रैक्टर की कॉस्ट कब तक रियलाइज करने वाला है? This is a problem, right? Which is why small land holding is a very, very big problem in the country, which is why we want land consolidation, right? Small farm holdings restrict productivity improvements because they restrict mechanization. Mechanization is a fixed cost. The more you have in terms of production, this fixed cost gets distributed over lots of output. That means a bigger landholder will be far more invested in a tractor because it gives them much more marketable surplus compared to a smaller farmer. He's not going to be, isko 10-20 saal lag jayenge ye cost realize karne ke liye. He's not going to be investing here, right? Which is why a better solution for us would be renting. खरीदे ना, rent करवा लो. ये तो कर ही सकते हैं. Common infra. This is your biggest problem. The biggest problem is that your land reforms failed. You still have 46% of your workforce in agriculture. 86% of your farmers are small and marginal. That means they hold a land holding of less than 2 hectares. The average land holding size in the country is less than 1 hectare. And the agricultural incomes from farm incomes, there are many estimates. One estimate was 46,000 per annum. Now 46,000 per annum per hectare. Remember, there will be many more estimates. Ye estimate is roughly around 2015-16. The numbers would have revised for sure. 46,000 per annum would mean how much per month? Roughly 4,000 per month per hectare. Since the average landholding size is closer to 1 hectare, only you can imagine that an average landholder family in the country makes 4,000 a month. एक normal household में 4 लोग तो होंगे rural areas में. That means every person is actually making less than 1,000 per month. And even out of this 46,000 per annum per hectare, 20% of the farm incomes are indirectly contributed by subsidies. That means the farm incomes are barely enough to keep you out of poverty line. The moment you withdraw subsidies, you will have plenty of your population going below the poverty line. This is a problem, which is why the government is stuck in a catch-22 situation. Now that you have rolled out this Frankenstein monster, how do you roll it back? Quite unlikely, right? This is a bigger problem. There are many problems here, right? Farm subsidy, food subsidy, productivity improvements, land holding ka size, mechanization pay problems. Then you have problems in terms of marketing of agricultural produce is a very, very fragmented market. Why? Because by legislation, you require the wholesale farm produce to only be sold in APMC mandis. Now each mandi will have their own license requirements. Some person who is a big retailer, if he wants to buy, he will have to secure licenses of many mandis. Then you have imposition of mandi fee, you have imposition of many other types of charges, right? This value dispersion which is caused to the eventual produce, this value dispersion is caused without any value addition. क्या value addition हो रही है तुम्हारी fragmented market में? The government tried to introduce what is called farm laws, 3 farm laws. They had to be repealed. This was at least one effort towards liberalizing agriculture in India, which remains the only sector which has not witnessed the benefits of liberalization compared to manufacturing, compared to services. This was one effort. The effort is put to waste now, right? There are many problems in here. बहुत सारी problems हैं. But this is the basic minimum that you should know. Right? There are problems right from what Green Revolution created. There are problems in terms of our food policy, right? In terms of how our food subsidy burden continues to increase year and year onwards. Why? Because 2018-19, we guaranteed that the farmers should get 150% of the input cost as MSP. The NFSA tells you that the issue price for your food grains could be revised every 3 years. It has not been revised since 2013. That means every year the MSP gets revised, the issue price continues to stay the same. The food subsidy burden continues to rise year and year onwards. Food subsidy continues to rise. Farm subsidies you cannot get rid of, right? That is an expenditure of roughly around 8 lakh crores. If you're spending 8 lakh crores only on this kind of expenditure, what is going to happen to the public investment in agriculture? It's going to suffer. Consequently, your irrigation potential is still at 55%. Only 55%, and closer to the time of independence, it was 16. Right? From 16 till 2025, you have only moved to 55% of your potential. Why? Because so much expenditure is going here. Right? This is the basic minimum that you need to know before you study any chapter on agriculture. Basic minimum. Problems in terms of marketing infrastructure, problems in terms of MSPs, problem in terms of the lopsided development, problems in terms of ownership structure. Basic minimum things before you read any survey or any chapter. This is going to be quick for us, right? Okay, let's look at what the economic survey this year talks about. What all does it cover? First is it gives you a basic overview of how agriculture in the country has performed of late. Agriculture contributes roughly 16% to our GDP. Remember, services is 55%, right? Industry is going to be more than roughly around 20-odd%, right? Agriculture only 16%. Remember, this is agriculture and allied sector, not the only sector within the primary sector. 16% of our GDP, agriculture. 46% of our workforce, agriculture. Right? Remember, structural transformation has not really happened. Second, agricultural income has only grown 5.2%. It has grown, sure. So kabhi, agar aapke paas, if you get an option in your prelims, it has grown. But the growth rate has been less than the growth rate of non-agricultural income. Agricultural income has grown only at 5.2% over the past 10 years, while non-agricultural income has grown at 6.24% over the past 10 years, 5.8 for overall economy. That means overall country mein incomes grow kari hai 5.8 pe, agricultural incomes grow kari hai 5.2 pe, and non-agricultural incomes grow kari hai 6.24 pe. Right? That means in comparison with other sectors, agriculture although is performing okay, but it's not comparative across other sectors of the economy also. Then growth performance, right? These numbers are going to be interesting. Last year's performance suffered. Every time agriculture ka performance suffers, of course, they attribute it to unfavorable weather conditions, right? Why would they attribute it to unfavorable conditions? Because 45% of your gross cropped area is still rainfall dependent. Right? So, of course, if there is going to be variable events, it is going to impact production too. You only have to be interested in looking at the trend. Right? The trend has been such, in fact, मैंने लिख के रखा है, robust growth averaging 5% annually from financial year 2017 till financial year 2023. Reasons: favorable weather patterns, advancements in agricultural practices, assured remunerative prices, improved institutional credit, crop diversification, support for sustainable practices. ये general बातें लिखी हुई हैं. इसमें बहुत ज़्यादा आपको समझ में नहीं रखना. The only thing you have to remember is ये trend क्या रहा है. Last year dip किया था, इस साल pick कर रहा है. ठीक है? Okay, now subsectoral variation in growth performance. That means within agriculture there are many subsectors. Remember, the sector is agriculture and allied. It has crop farming, it has forestry and logging, it has fisheries, and it has livestock. Right? They are looking at what has happened within the subsectors. Agriculture and allied, that means the combined sector. This is CAGR, compound annual growth rate. The growth rate was 3.6%. All crops, crop farming only, grew at 2.1. Cereals, remember crops mein cereals will be a subcomponent, grew at 2%. Pulses grew at 5%. Fruits and vegetables 3.5. Oil seeds 1.9. Livestock has grown. Remember, those sectors बहुत important रहेंगे, livestock and fisheries. They have been your promising sectors in the last decade or so. Livestock has grown at 5.8, which is higher than everything else combined. Fisheries has grown at even higher rate, which is an 8.7. So you remember these outliers. Move on to milk. Milk will be a subsector within the livestock sector, which is the dominant part of the livestock sector, grown at 5.8. Meat and eggs 10.5. Condiments and spices at 6.7. You don't have to remember each of these numbers, just look at the peaks and troughs. Right? Peaks देख लो, troughs देख लो. दो याद रखना, livestock and fisheries and also oilseeds. In fact, मैंने लिख के रखा हुआ है. Everything that has to be remembered, I have marked it down in yellow. 11.6% of the world's total output, right, which is to say India's agricultural output is 11.6% of world's output. 1/10 of world's agricultural output we produce. That means in terms of production, we are very high, but considerably lower yields. That means per hectare or per input, we are producing far lesser compared to the rest of the world. Remember, low productivity, high production subsystem we are. Why? Input intensive. Input intensive kyun? Because these small and marginal farmers, they cannot mechanize. They are not aided by too much irrigation. Therefore, what they will continuously do is, they'll continuously use fertilizers. They'll continuously use more and more pesticides. That's the only approach that they have. The more fertilizers that they use, after a point in time, it's also going to be counterproductive for them. It's going to also degrade land for them. So our yields are lower, our production is high. The crop sector witnessed a modest CAGR, that means not as good, of 2.1% from financial year 13 till financial year 22. Slower growth rate of oilseeds is at a concern. Why is this a concern? Because we import quite a lot of oilseeds. Remember, in the last few years, there has been development in terms of high-yielding varieties of oilseeds, the Dhara mustard. Right? The offtake of domestic oilseeds has not been great. If there is a growth rate, slow growth rate of oilseeds production in the country, that means you're going to be dependent on the rest of the world too. This is going to be your import burden. So this is a concern. High-value sectors, horticulture, livestock, and fisheries have emerged as the primary contributors to the overall growth of agriculture, which is to say, when you look at agricultural incomes growing at 5%, a significant contribution has been made by livestock and horticulture, these high-value services, these high-value subsectors. This was also a recommendation which was made by Ashok Dalwai Committee. The Ashok Dalwai Committee had said that you have to diversify agriculture. Why are you stuck in only crop farming? And even if you're in crop farming, why are you stuck only in cereals? Why don't you migrate to other high-value crops? Right? The reasons I will tell you later. Why are we still stuck in rice and wheat? The reason we are stuck in rice and wheat is our PDS. Right? Anyway, fisheries sector has demonstrated the highest CAGR of 13.67%. So fisheries is going to be important, followed by livestock, which grew at almost 13%. Livestock and fisheries, remember this, I am expecting they are going to ask you a question in mains also, livestock and fisheries, because across agriculture and allied, this is a very, very promising sector, more specifically because fisheries is also export oriented. Right? A lot of your fish products you export across the world, so this is high export potential also. Comparison of international productivity. Remember, production where we contribute 1/10 of the world's production, but in terms of productivity, where are we? How much do we make per acre? Or how much do we make per unit input? Cereals ki productivity, remember the orange one is India, the blue one is world. Cereals mein productivity is roughly around 3,400 kgs per hectare. Across the world, it's closer to 4,200 per hectare. That means we are behind the world. Total pulses mein bhi India ki productivity, across the world productivity is still comparable, but lesser. It is lesser even in paddy. It is lesser in maize, far lesser in maize. Productivity का मतलब क्या है? Per unit input कितना produce कर रहे हो? It is less in soybean. It is very comparable in groundnuts. Our dominant sector is cereals, more specifically two cereals, rice and wheat, जहाँ our productivity is significantly lower. Not significantly, but it's definitely lower than the rest of the world. Now there is also an interstate variation. Interstate variation in terms of growth performance. Yes, agriculture has grown of late, but amongst the states, which states have outperformed the other ones? The outlier case has been Andhra Pradesh. A reason behind Andhra Pradesh being an outlier was Andhra Pradesh diversified to other crops. Andhra Pradesh was a leading performer with a compound annual growth rate of 8.8%, followed closely by Madhya Pradesh and Tamil Nadu. The reason I have mentioned is diversification towards high yield crops. Andhra Pradesh diversified towards jowar, MP diversified towards pulses, more specifically moong, and Tamil Nadu diversified towards maize. Right? There is still scope for us to diversify. We are stuck in our rice wheat system. Those states which have diversified their produce have grown more than other states. This is what this slide demonstrates. Now, crop production, what we want is increased productivity. We want more crop diversification. We want input use efficiency also. improvement in yield. Remember this, we are a high production but a low productivity subsystem. That means we have to work towards improvement of productivity. This improvement of productivity has to be done across regions. That means there are some states which are performing better compared to others. It has also to be done across crops, because you just saw crops, maybe there is a productivity potential differential. That means we have to work on farm inputs, we have to work on post-harvest factors, and we also have to work on policy. Firstly, on farm inputs, we have to have improved access to quality seeds, better irrigation facilities, efficient water management practices, effective extension services, soil health improvements. This is on the input side. On the post-harvest factors, we have to modernize our post-harvest infrastructure. We have to also create accessible markets. We are going to discuss this in detail. And then policy mein, price policy. Because these are the contributing factors behind us being very, very low productivity. Why? Now, in terms of our seeds, problem with our quality seeds is that seed research primarily happened for two, which was rice and wheat. Some improvement in maize also happened in Mexico, in the US, but maize is not a dominant staple crop in the country, although in case of Punjab it used to be, not anymore. Right? Other improvements across the world have not really happened. So whatever changed across seeds, you only saw that change happening in the country. The bigger problem was that post-Green Revolution, in your food policy, you had something called the PDS system. You wanted the food to be made affordable to people. How do you make food affordable to people? By giving this food at less than what the market price is. That's a big problem for you. Now, what happens is, year on year, you have people who are, on an average less than 1 hectare of land. They're going to be dependent so much on fertilizer. They're going to be dependent so much on pesticides, so much on seeds, high quality seeds. The problem in the country is high quality seeds. Since Green Revolution, traditional varieties of seeds you have seen on a decline, right? Because they did not yield too much. Now, people who are making more of this produce, they make only a specific type of produce, which is primarily rice and wheat. Why do they make it only for rice and wheat? In fact, closer to 50% of our gross cropped area goes towards rice and wheat cultivation. Reason being PDS system and our procurement systems. Remember, we have something called a price support mechanism. The price support mechanism has to be an emergency mechanism, which is to say you try to sell your produce in the market. If the market prices fail you, then the government intervenes. In case of rice and wheat, we do not wait for a price to fail in the market. In case of rice and wheat, for our PDS operations, our procurement price is also the MSP. Right? Which is to say, this price support mechanism for rice and wheat is not really a price support mechanism. It's actually a procurement mechanism. We are buying from farmers at MSP. We are not waiting for market prices to fail. And this PDS supports roughly 81 crore people. According to 2011 census, would be far higher now, will be somewhere around 100 crore people. That means you want too many more food grains, right? Lots of food grains you have to buy at MSP. Now, MSP gets revised every year, and MSP is a minimum of 150% of input cost. That means there is an assured profit margin of 50%. Add to this what is called open-ended procurement. Open-ended procurement ka matlab kya hai? The government is not going to stop you, right? If you're a rice and wheat farmer, you can supply to the government as much as you want. Subject to some basic fair and average quality norms, the government is going to lift your produce. Now, the government has created an incentive structure such that rice and wheat, if I make, the government is going to, of course, take it, and the government is at least going to give me a 50% profit margin. This can be revised even higher. 150% is the minimum. That means, what am I going to produce? Why would I risk producing other crops? Kyun karunga main risk? When the rice and wheat is going to be procured from me, there is a guaranteed procurement, there is an open-ended procurement, no limits, right? I'm going to be making rice and wheat. Consequently, such regions which were not even, you would say, not even adapted towards rice and wheat cultivation, more specifically Punjab for rice, right? They still cultivate rice. Why? Because it gets lifted. It hurts dietary diversification, it also hurts crop diversification, right? Which is what the recommendation is, that you have to move towards other diversity crops too. Right? This is a big problem in our case. Now, on the input side, everything will be discussed as to what the government is doing towards seeds, towards irrigation, towards water management. What is the government basically doing towards each of these? First is in terms of seeds. Quality, accessibility, and adoption. Three things have to be looked at. First, you have to have quality seeds. Second, these quality seeds have to be made accessible to the farmers, near to them. And then you have to have them adopt these seeds also. Towards making these seeds, there is this organization called the ICAR, Indian Council for Agricultural Research. And Indian Council for Agricultural Research has been researching into climate-resistant seeds as a priority. Why? You will see that in India, 45% of your gross cropped area is unirrigated or rainfall dependent. And in the course of time, there has been extreme weather events which are on the rise. These could be really wet spells, these could be dry spells, and they hurt yields. So for us to also look at whether our seeds will be climate resilient in the future or not, this is a priority. The ICAR is catering to this priority by developing seeds. Majority of the seeds developed since 2014, 2,593 varieties, उसमें से 2100, roughly around 2,200 varieties are basically climate resilient. Who is doing it? The ICAR. Now they are developing these seeds. These seeds have to be made accessible. For them, we have what is called seed banks. Seed banks will be areas, or you will say seed banks will be institutions, which will be set up nearer to the farmers, where these high quality seeds will be sent so that the farmers get these seeds from these seed banks. Third is adoption. तुमने seeds मुहैया तो करवा लिए, right? Whether the farmers will adopt these seeds or not, उसके लिए क्या करना है हमको? Demonstrations, right? Proof of concept का मतलब क्या? कि ये seed use कर दो, इससे फायदा होगा. This proof of concept has to be done through demonstrations. There is this program, the National Innovations in Climate Resilient Agriculture Initiative. Under this initiative, there are demonstrations of climate resilient technology packages across 121 vulnerable districts. This is what the government is doing towards seeds. Making seeds who? ICAR, primarily. Second is accessibility. The government is making it accessible through seed banks. Then to foster greater adoption, we are conducting demonstrations. Under this initiative is called the National Innovation in Climate Resilient Agriculture Initiative. This is what has been mentioned in this year's economic survey, only apart from this. In regions such as the northwestern India, heat-tolerant wheat varieties have seen a widespread acceptance because of this initiative. Get this? Any problems understanding this part? Towards fertilizers. Now, what are the problems of India in terms of fertilizers? Fertilizers hote kya? They're not the only fertilizers. What are fertilizers? See, plants require nutrients for growth. These nutrients could be hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, sulfur, magnesium, manganese, molybdenum, you have other zinc, boron, right? Now, these nutrients for plants, 3 of them they source from the environment, from the atmosphere. The remaining are what you call minerals. Amongst these minerals, NPK are required in the most abundant quantities, right? So you have macronutrients, then you have intermediate nutrients, then you have micronutrients. Now, soils which are deficient in these nutrients, right, you will want to augment the quality of soils through the application of these compounds, which we call fertilizers. Primarily, 3 types of fertilizers that we use: urea, DAP, and MOP. Urea is primarily a nitrogenous. Remember this, it does not mean कि urea में सिर्फ nitrogen होता है, right? सब में NPK होता ही है, कहीं में 2 होंगे, कहीं में 3 होंगे, right? But for it to be fertilizer grade urea, right, there has to be a certain minimum quantity of nitrogen. For example, muriates of potash would basically mean potassium chloride. Any compound to be categorized as muriates of potash at least has to have 65% of potassium in it, 65%. Right? That means other compounds will also be there, other minerals will also be there, but these are primarily nitrogenous. This is diammonium phosphate. This is muriates of potassium chloride, right? Phosphorus and potassium. Now, across each of these, this is required in a 4:2:1 manner. Urea in the context, we have urea subsidies also, right? We have DAP and MOP subsidies also. Remember, MOP is only imported. Both of them are both manufactured and also imported in the country. Now, in terms of our fertilizer subsidy burden, we have the highest burden in urea. Why? because there is a different subsidy mechanism that we follow for it. It's called a cost plus approach. In the cost plus approach, we fix the MRP, right? The difference between the cost of production profit margin minus the MRP is the subsidy component of who? Of the manufacturer, right? Not the farmer. Ye jata hai manufacturer ko. In the case of DAP and MOP, we have what is called nutrient-based subsidy. Now, across these three fertilizers, the government has subsidized urea to the tune of 75%. That means, ideally, it should have been sold at 100 rupees. It is being sold at 25. 75% is the burden that the government is paying. Reason is also one, it is required in high quantities, plus it's very, very inexpensive. It's very cheap compared to the other two, right? Which is why you find very, very indiscriminate use of urea, right? Cheap, very, very heavily subsidized, also is required in higher quantities. This is a major problem. And the more you use of urea, not just urea, other fertilizers also, the less soil organic content is going to be. The more you apply urea, after a certain point, it degrades the soil quality. More specifically, it affects soil organic carbon content. Right? This is a major problem. There are other problems too, right? But some problems you need to know about fertilizers in the country. Now, what is the government doing? Right? Use of fertilizers mein soil degradation, especially the decline in organic soil carbon, organic carbon content poses a significant challenge. This is intrinsically linked to the reckless use of fertilizers, more specifically urea. Why? Because it's very, very cheap, also is required in higher quantities. Now, it's known to reduce soil organic carbon, which is why what we have to do is we have to, one, improve the kind of urea that we use, plus we also have to make sure that people use it judiciously. In India, apart from soil being deficient in your macronutrients, the soils are also deficient in other nutrients, intermediate and micro, boron, iron and sulfur. This is mentioned in the economic survey this year. What are the initiatives? First initiative is urea gold. What is urea gold? You mix urea with sulfur, right? Sulfur is also required by plants as a nutrient, right? What that does is, you will say, prolongs the release of nitrogen by urea into the soil. That means the use efficiency for nitrogen is going to increase. The conversion of soil carbon towards carbon dioxide is going to decline. Plus, because this fertilizer is going to be effective for a longer duration of time, chances are that the farmers are going to use it a little more judiciously. Right? It stays for long. The effect of urea gold stays for long. This is one initiative. The other is use of drones and fertigation. Use of drones and fertigation, firstly, what is fertigation? It is a combination of two things, fertilizer application and irrigation. Drone-based fertilizer application and also irrigation is going to be what? Is going to be more aimed towards use efficiency. That means you are not using, you can say, flooding approach towards irrigation. You are using it a little more efficiently. The water use efficiency plus fertilizer use efficiency has to be improved. Indiscriminately सीधे फेंक नहीं देते. Right? You are using drones. You are वहीं फेंक रहे हो जहाँ चाहिए होगा. Right? Pranam initiative. What is the initiative? Program for restoration, awareness generation, nourishment, and amelioration of Mother Earth. What does it do? It is encouraging states to adopt alternative fertilizers, more specifically organic fertilizers, and also move towards nano urea, nano DAP, and organic fertilizers. This initiative was mentioned in the economic survey, so you should know there is something called Pranam initiative, because this could be a question that they ask you directly. What is Pranam initiative, or in what context is the word Pranam used? Right? So this is basically information. In context of fertilizers, this was only mentioned in your economic survey this year. Right? Urea gold, use of drones and fertigation, then Pranam initiative. Move towards irrigation systems. I told you the biggest casualty for subsidies, because of subsidies, is capex. More specifically, public investment. Private investment नहीं. Private investment का मतलब कि farmer अपनी जगह से क्या कर रहा है? Public investment, right? Government का investment in capital expenditure has suffered. Why? I told you, for subsidy burdens. Now, rainfall and irrigation systems, right? These numbers are very, very important for you. इसको याद रख लेना. In India, the sector remains highly vulnerable to weather. About 55% of the net zone area receives irrigation. This was 16%. ये मैंने number खुद से add किया. 16% around the time of independence. You have grown from only 16% of your irrigation potential to only 55%. Right? You have not covered it across the board. So 55%. States with high irrigation coverage, कौन-कौन सी है? Your usual suspects: Punjab, Haryana, UP, and Telangana state. Right? These are your high, you can say your suspects, usual suspects. लो इरिगेशन कवरेज कौन कौन सी है? मेनली असम एंड झारखंड. लिखा हुआ है दिस इज 98%, 94, 84, 86. And Assam and Jharkhand is less than 20%. That means within the states also there is huge variability in terms of the irrigation potential realized. Moreover, more than 2/3 of India's agricultural land faces the threat of drought. Right? This is also mentioned by the Economic Survey this year, with a 35% probability of drought occurrences. 67% of the area in the country faces the threat of drought, and there is a high likelihood 35% probability of drought occurrences happening, and this risk is also not uniform across the country. Some regions have a relatively higher risk of drought, some regions have a relatively lower risk of droughts. The implication of such extreme events happening is going to be squarely on who? Squarely on the small and marginal farmers. Why? Because they already have very little marketable surplus. जितना वो बेच पाते वो already बहुत कम है. Irrigation का potential तुमने realize किया नहीं. Right? That means if there is an extreme weather phenomenon, it could be a wet spell, it could be a dry spell, it is going to hurt the marketable surplus of a small and marginal farmer more. जो बेचारा 30 ही किलो बेच पा रहा है, अगर वो 30 भी नहीं रहा, it is going to be a problem for him. The big farmer is at least going to mitigate it. Some part of its crops may still be surplus, you can say marketable surplus, but it's going to be a major problem for small and marginal farmers who are 86% of your land holdings. Right? This is what the survey also talks about. Then it says there has been an increase in the frequency of dry spells and an increase in the frequency of short wet spells. Dry spells का मतलब क्या? Average rainfall जितनी होनी थी उससे कम हुई. Extreme wet spell का मतलब क्या? Average rainfall जितनी होनी थी उससे ज़्यादा हुई. दोनों का impact होता है on yield. In fact, the survey also points out that studies have said that correlation between yield losses and rainfall deficits is stronger for extreme rainfall deficiencies than for minor variations. That means 100 centimeter rainfall on an average होनी चाहिए थी. 90 हो गई तो इतना problem नहीं होगा yield पे, पर अगर 40 हो गई, then it has a significant impact on the yield of crops, which studies have demonstrated. Right? Now, if you look at variability, this is increase in gross irrigated area over the course of time. If you see, it's 2010-11 onwards till about 2022. It has not increased significantly. Right? If you look at it, this is no ऐसा नहीं बढ़ के जा रहा. It's somewhere around the same. It was closer to around 46% then. It is roughly around 55% now. In a span of roughly 14 years, has not increased remarkably. Now, if you look at, this is the source of irrigation, if you want to remember, great. This is departure from average annual rainfall in percentage terms, right? Which is to say, ज़्यादा भी हो सकती है and कम भी हो सकती है. If you can clearly see, there has been both crests and troughs, which is to say, more than what is expected, less than what is expected, right? Both of them will have an impact on yield. Especially will have an impact on yield, given that most of your farms will not be irrigated. This is a problem. What are the solutions and initiatives in terms of irrigation? First, of course, is to increase the area under irrigation. That means public investment in irrigation has to increase. For that, I don't know if the government sources the money by reducing subsidies or it sources from elsewhere, but this is some requirement which has to be taken care of. You're only at 55%, it has to definitely be increased in the future. Then you diversify towards heat and water resistant crops because this is the impending reality. Right? You will have scenarios of extreme weather events in the future. These could be dry spells, these could be wet spells. You have to prepare for those also. What is the government doing? They only speak of how the coverage of irrigation has increased from 16 till 21, from 49% till 55%, not a great increase. Per crop, more drop initiative, these are initiatives that you have to remember. Per crop, more drop under the Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana. What does it do? Incentivizes the installation of micro irrigation. How? By providing 45 to 55% of the project cost to small and marginal farmers and other farmers. Small and marginal farmers को 55% of the project cost दी जाती है सरकार से, and other farmers को roughly 45%. They are incentivizing private investment. That means अगर तुम अपने यहाँ पर माइक्रो इरिगेशन फैसिलिटीज लगाओगे तो तुम्हें कुछ सब्सिडी सरकार देगी, तुम्हारा कुछ बर्डन सरकार बेयर करने वाली है. This is the per drop more crop initiative. Then you have the micro irrigation fund. What does it do? It gives interest subvention of 2% granted to innovative solutions. That means if there is a project, this project is, you can say, working in the direction of innovating in terms of utilizing irrigation facilities. The government, in terms of when they get loans, the government is going to give them an interest subvention, right? This is an interest or a credit subsidy right? In the previous case, this is more of a capital subsidy. Get this? Different schemes, per crop more drop. The other one is micro irrigation fund. It also talks about rain-fed area development, which is now integrated under the RKVY, the Rashtriya Krishi Vikas Yojana. What do we do under this? Basically, we're integrating multiple types of cropping, right? Which is say the farmers should also, in addition to crop farming, integrate, let's say, livestock with it, integrate aquaculture with it, integrate apiculture with it, so that if there is a problem because of extreme weather events, your incomes could be supplemented from other sources. Agar crop suffer करती हैं, at least livestock से आप कुछ पैसा बना लो. This is the scheme which is the rain-fed area development scheme under the RKVY. Now has been integrated. Same cheese. Under the system, cropping system is to be integrated with activities like horticulture, livestock, fisheries, agroforestry, apiculture, etc. Why? Because in addition to maximizing farm returns, because you're now investing in multiple activities, it can maximize your farm returns, but more importantly, it is going to mitigate the impact of drought, flood, and other extreme events. अगर crop fail करती है, कम से कम बाकी चीजें तुम्हें कुछ तो income generate करके देंगी. Next is community-led, technology-enabled model for rejuvenating water bodies. Herein, you're using GEI technology to find water bodies which could be restored. And in this case, it's community-led. That means you're going to incentivize farmers to locate these water bodies, report it to the authorities so that these water bodies could be rejuvenated. But the major solution has to be first one, which is increase the area under irrigation. This has to be done. बाकी तो है कि use efficiency बढ़ा लो, but increase the area under irrigation has to be done. Next is important things to remember. 8% of area in India, because this could be a question, this is not mentioned in the economic survey. This could be information that they may ask you. How much area in India is under micro irrigation? Only 8%, right? How is micro irrigation important? Because it reduces water consumption. Drip irrigation reduces water consumption by 39 to 50%, 55%. If you have seen drip irrigation, tap करके drop करता है exactly over जहाँ पर होना चाहिए. And then you have, it also boosts your crop yields by 33 to 41%. This is information you should know, right? If you get asked a question in mains, you can know. Or if this is information that you get asked in prelims, you should know, right? It's not just कि हमारे पास irrigation नहीं है. It's also about whatever water we have, we are utilizing, there has to be use efficiency in that water too. Very important, agricultural credit. Remember, in terms of farm credit, which is also an input, the government made lots of interventions. In fact, if you look at this graph, ये graph आपको सिर्फ दिखाएगा in terms of loans dispersed. This graph is more important, right? This graph is important because it shows you how non-institutional lending has decreased and institutional lending to farmers has increased over the course of time. In fact, there is also some bit of history behind this. Closer to the time of independence, you had farmers who were dependent on the local money lenders, local zamindars. The problem with local money lenders and local zamindars, which are non-institutional sources of credit, is that bookkeeping is trashy, plus usurious rates of interest, plus the recovery is also coupled with violence, right? Now the government wanted institutional sources of credit to be extended to who? To the farmers. Now bank is a business, right? Farmers were 2/3 of your economy, of your workforce was involved in agriculture, and agriculture of what kind? Barely subsistence. That means for a bank, it's not going to be a profitable venture, right? To venture into rural areas where the incomes are already low, give them loans with the expectation of no recovery. That's a problem, which is why eventually what we did was we nationalized some banks, right? And enforced what is called the PSL scheme, the Priority Sector Lending Scheme, the lead bank scheme. First wave happens in 1969. Till 1969, we were pretty much dependent on cooperatives, right? 1969, जहाँ से आपको ये sharp decline दिखता है, this period is where you had your first wave of bank nationalization plus the priority sector lending scheme, right? Priority sector lending scheme का मतलब क्या? That 40% of your adjusted net bank credit has to be extended to some sectors which will be classified as priority sectors, amongst which agriculture is one. Agriculture has to get a minimum of 18%. You can give more loans, but minimum of 18% credit has to be extended to agriculture. That was enforced after bank nationalization also. This led to a sharp decline in the non-institutional sources of finance. Now this is 1969 odd, right? After this, you have in 1976, you have regional rural banks. 1982 is when you have NABARD. 1990 is your first loan waiver. 1995 is when you have the Rural Infrastructure Development Fund. 1998, you introduce what is called the Kisan Credit Card. If I'm not mistaken, 2002, 2003 is when you had interest subvention schemes, which you later modified. And post that, 2004 or 5, or if I'm not mistaken, probably around 6, you had this scheme called the Ground Level Credit Scheme, right? You have also added what is called the Prompt Repayment Incentive System. These have been many interventions towards rural credit, which has led the rise of institutional credit towards agriculture in the country. But if you remember, if you can clearly see, since 1991 till about now, this increase has somewhere plateaued. It is not going beyond it, right? This is plateaued somewhere. That means non-institutional sources of credit, agar 100 रुपए का credit उठाया जा रहा है by farmers, 75 is coming from institutional sources, 25 is still coming from non-institutional sources. The reason here is the government thought that the stumbling block is interest. While the stumbling block was not interest, the stumbling block was collateral requirements. Banks will require collateral. Farmers, because there are far too many of those and are also very poor, they don't have collateral to offer. Collateral becomes a bigger impediment. When they go to non-institutional sources of credit, they're not going to be asking for collateral. So they are going to be getting money, despite a majority of these loans being charged at more than 20%. 20% से ज़्यादा rate of interest पे भी charge होता है, तब भी बहुत सारे लोग ये loan लेते हैं. क्यों? Primary reason is collateral. Across institutional sources of lending, right? What we have started to focus on is interest subvention. Interest subvention का मतलब क्या? Medium term loans, short term loans आपको दिए जाएंगे at an interest subvention. That means if the market rate of interest is, let's say, 9%, the government is going to pay 2% on your behalf. That means effectively you will have to pay only 7% as interest. Later on, we also added what is called the Prompt Repayment Incentive Scheme. This was to improve the credit culture, rural credit culture in the country. The idea was, if you pay promptly, repay your loan promptly, you are going to get further incentive of 3%. That means effectively, if you are taking loans, short-term, mid-term loans, right, and if you pay back in time, your effective rate of interest is not going to be 9, your effective rate of interest is going to be 4%. We thought interest rate को अगर हम घटा देंगे तो पिकअप हो जाएगा. हुआ है, but since 1990s थोड़ा taper कर गया, right? One requirement which is not being addressed currently is collateral, right? Collateral requirements is something which has to be looked into. In fact, there are some micro lending schemes, microfinance institutions which are also innovating in this regard. But the broader picture you have to know, right? Your decline, sharp decline क्यों होता है? PSL, right? Bank lend, you will say bank nationalization. This you have to remember. Broadly, 75% of the credit in the country, rural credit is institutional, 25 is non-institutional. Now you move to, I'm guessing in the class this would be done, na? ये बताया जाता होगा, right? Towards crop insurance, we had what we called area yield assurance programs. Now we have the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana. Do you know how crop insurance works? अरे कैसे बताऊंगा? सब कुछ ही बता दूं फिर तो खत्म हो जाएंगे. चलो बता देता हूँ. Normally what happens is, what is crop insurance? Insurance का मतलब क्या? It is a hedge against uncertainty. That means what happens is, let's say if there is 1,000 kgs that this area produces, there are reasons beyond your control that may affect this production, right? You may have less rainfall, you may have infestation, whatever reason, your production declines from 1,000 to 800 kgs. This is also going to lead to a decline in your income. You want to safeguard yourself against this, which is why you go for crop insurance. What is crop insurance going to be? Any company is going to look at the average production in this region. They're going to be looking at previous 4 to 5 sowing seasons and see what the average has been like. Right? Basis this average, let's say this 1,000 kgs of rice would trade at rupees 5,000. You want to have an insurance cover of rupees 5,000 because this can actually go down to 0, right? For you to have an insurance cover of 5,000, you'll have to pay a certain premium to the insurance company. That means that will be a part of this 5,000. इसको हम बोलते हैं insurance cover. जैसे आपको अगर हेल्थ इंश्योरेंस 40 लाख का लेना है, आपको 40 लाख थोड़े देने हैं, फिर क्या फायदा इंश्योरेंस लेने का? यू हैव टू गिव व्हाट 10 to 15%, right? 10 to 15,000, same thing, right? The idea is there will be an insurance premium which will be charged from you by who? By the insurance company. Depending upon what is your percentage shortfall, right? Whatever is the sum assured, उतना ही percentage आपको insurance company दे देगी. Which is to say, if for some reason this year your produce was 500 kgs and you had insured it for rupees 5,000, since the decline has been 50%, you're going to get 50% of your insurance cover. That means rupees 2,500 by who? By the insurance company. For you only paying an insurance premium. Right? The idea is they're going to pool money from lots of farmers, right? Which is why, and risk distribution hoga basically, right? Under the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, what the government has done is premium rates को कर दिया है cap कि इससे ज़्यादा premium मांग नहीं सकते. Then they invite private insurance companies and also national insurance companies to come and bid for it. Those companies which offer you the lowest bid, they are selected. The difference between their bid and the ceiling that the government has set is the subsidy component that the government is going to pay. Which government is going to pay? Both the central and the state government together, right? In equal measure. That is the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana. उसी के ऊपर थोड़ी सी इन्होंने information दे दिया तुमको. Okay. Largest, remember what you have to remember is this, that this is the largest crop insurance program in the world in terms of farmer enrollment. Third largest in terms of premiums. Covers both pre-sowing and post-harvest risks, because risk could be pre-sowing भी risk हो सकता है, post-harvest भी risk हो सकता है, ये दोनों को cover करता है. These are the questions that they may ask you. What are the features of Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana? Which of these statements are correct? उस type के. The participation of state governments and insurers has increased to 24 and 15. That means 24 state governments are now participating in the insurance scheme, and 15 private insurance companies have now been brought in. And the idea is that the government, central government incentivizes both. कि private insurance companies भी आओ and state governments भी participate करो, right? Which has increased. 32% reduction in premium rates compared to previous years. And why would there be a reduction? There would be a reduction because there is now greater competition in terms of insurance companies. बहुत सारी insurance companies आई हैं. They are going to be bidding. The lowest bid has to be selected. Quite obviously, this is going to bring the premium rates down. The number of enrolled farmers has increased by 26% in FY24 since FY23. And it's a huge increase. This huge increase is also because the base is very low. There is in India very low uptake of insurance. खास तौर पे farm insurance, crop insurance क्यों? This is mandatory for loany farmers. अगर आपके ऊपर कोई loan है, तो आपको ये insurance लेना mandatory है. For non-loany farmers, उनके लिए कोई mandatory है नहीं. And in the country, for some reason, we think that we are all snowflakes, कि हमारे यहाँ तो shortfall नहीं होगी, लोग generally लेते नहीं हैं, right? Since the last year, there has been a 26% increase, so this is a good sign. The insured area is also expanded. This is just information, which is say the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana has been performing better since the last year. The numbers you can look at. It's not, you have to remember at least the ones that I have highlighted. इतना तो आप कर लेना. In terms of agriculture mechanization, remember the biggest stumbling block towards agriculture mechanization in the country is the average landholding size. The average landholding size is less than 1 hectare, which is going to disincentivize mechanization. Why? Because the fixed cost is too much. Right? You don't have as much marketable surplus. तो आप कब तक ये recover करोगे cost of tractors, right? The cost of mechanization is not only tractors. So for that, the solution could be renting, right? Don't get the farmers to buy this. Allow the farmers to rent it, right? You may have companies, you may have cooperatives who collectively pool funds, and then they buy these farm equipments. The farmers, because the members of these cooperatives, can rent them as needed. That is a good solution. Now, in terms of agricultural mechanization, there is this submission, which is called the Submission on Agricultural Mechanization, SMAM. It supports state governments with what? With training and demonstrations related to agricultural machinery. This is about skilling. In establishing custom hiring centers, remember custom hiring centers are the same, right? Which is to say people may come together, people may set up a firm, set up a cooperative. This cooperative is going to pool money, buy this equipment, and rent it out eventually. Custom hiring centers are also incentivized by the government. That if you set up a custom hiring center, we are going to give you a subsidy on loans also. Similarly, assisting farmers in acquiring various farming equipment. There is something called farm machinery banks. Remember, these are different. They work in tandem. Custom hiring centers, they secure loans at subsidized rates from farm machinery banks. These are banks primarily meant for giving loans, subsidized loans, or giving an interest subvention to acquire these equipments, which will eventually be rented out. The third is, ये तो last year news में भी था ही, right, which is drones to women SHGs. The government wants to incentivize drone manufacturing, right? The government एक ही तीर से दो शिकार करने की कोशिश कर रही है, women empowerment भी चाहिए, and use efficiency भी चाहिए. So what the government is trying to do is, the government is giving out drone packages to who? To women-led SHGs who will eventually rent it out. Women empowerment भी हो जाएगा, साथ के साथ तुम्हारी use efficiency भी बढ़ेगी. This was in the news last year, right? In fact, I'm sure this must have been in the news many times. Up until now, सुना तो हो गई. This is also mentioned. See, what the government does is central financial assistance of 80% of the drone's cost and related ancillary charges up to a maximum of 8 lakh will be granted to the women SHGs for drone purchases. These SHGs are going to purchase this drone and eventually are going to rent it out. So there will be a source of income for them. For them to purchase these drones, the government is going to give them some capital support. Get this? Remember, यही नहीं है दुनिया में कि हमने बस इतना ही किया मैकेनाइजेशन. ये है लास्ट ईयर से अब तक इकोनॉमिक सर्वे ने क्या मेंशन किया, 2 से 3, राइट? तो ये आपको याद रखनी है एटलीस्ट बाय द टाइम यू गोइंग टू राइट योर प्रीलिम्स. दिस इज नॉट द ओनली थिंग दैट वी आर डूइंग. ये मत सोच लेना कि दिस इज द बी ऑल एंड एंड ऑल ऑफ लाइफ, इससे ज़्यादा कुछ होता ही नहीं है. Then there is something called extension services. What are extension services? Extension services का मतलब क्या है? There is a high yielding variety of seed, right? It is being made in ICAR. How would the farmer sitting in Muzaffarnagar know about it? There is a new technique of crop farming or crop management, right? This technique is being developed by research universities across the world. How does the farmer know about it? There is a demand of bigger garlic in Indian markets. How does the farmer know that there is this demand? That means there is this huge information asymmetry in agricultural markets. This information asymmetry where information is being created versus those who need this information, primarily or farmers. This information asymmetry is bridged through services which are what we call extension services. Extension services are basically services which will bridge this information deficit. That means jahan se information banti hai, take it from there and give it to those who need this information, which is basically your farmers, right? We have a submission on agricultural extension. We have something called Agriculture Technology Management Agency. What does it do? It focuses on sharing latest agriculture technologies through farmer training, demonstrations, exposure visits, Kisan Melas. Just remember these names. Short duration skill training programs we also have. We have also set up 4 regional extension educational institutions in Haryana, Telangana, Gujarat, and Assam. The government also operates what is called Kisan call centers, that if you need some information, just ring them up, right? Simple. Remember, this is not the only thing that we do towards extension. This is the thing which has been mentioned this year. So these names you should remember कि इस type पे directly question पूछा जा सकता है. Towards agricultural marketing infrastructure, now they did not go into anything else apart from marketing infrastructure. They have only mentioned that there are some schemes. One is the AMI, the Agriculture Marketing Infrastructure Sub-Scheme, which has been there since 2014. You also have something called the AIF, Agricultural Infrastructure Fund. What do these schemes do? Firstly, first one does, it provides capital subsidies up to roughly around 33% to individuals, farmers, and cooperatives towards establishing a range of primarily storage facilities. This is encouragement of private investment. Remember, the government is not encouraging public investment in here. This is private investment. You use your own money. You want to set up a storage unit. The government is going to give you some capital subsidy up to 33%. Primarily storage, amongst other things. The other one is called the Agricultural Infrastructure Fund, which is medium-term loans for post-harvest management and community farming projects. This is more in the form of loans. This is more in the form of capital subsidy. Primarily for storage. This is for a range of different operations, not just storage. Then you have ENAM. ENAM is Electronic National Agriculture Market. This is the only unified national agriculture market that you have in the country, right? The farm laws intended to create a unified national agriculture market, right? Right now it is very, very fragmented. Why is it very fragmented? Because agriculture market mein trade is regulated by what is called APMLs. So if you have country like India, sorry for this, it'll look something like this. every state will have some designated areas which are called mandis. Any wholesale trade of agriculture produce only and only has to be done in these mandis. This trade will be regulated through agriculture produce marketing legislations. Each of these mandis will have an APMC of their own. You may have one APMC which operates multiple markets, but every market will be under one or the other APMC for sure. Now, each APMC also gets sources of funding from what is happening in this market, right? Which is to say, there will be a levy of mandi fee, there will be weighing charges, bridging charges, there will be vehicle entry tax, multiple types of charges that happen. There will be a license requirement too. Right now, if you can take a bird eye view of the agriculture market in the country, it's very, very fragmented, right? Multiple states are moving towards a single license system and a single point levy. Single license system ka matlab kya? For you to operate in Bathinda and in Kapurthala and in Ludhiana and in Jalandhar, in Punjab, you don't have to get licenses from each APMC. You just get one license for the entire state, right? That is one. But the bigger problem still remains, which is interstate to fir bhi variability hogi. The farm laws tried to subvert this. The farm laws said, we're not going to do anything about these mandis. All the area, except for these mandis, we are going to declare that as an outside trade area. And in this outside trade area, there is no requirement for a license. Remember, the requirement for license is already not for farmer. वो होता है wholesalers पर, license commission agents पर. The farmer is free to sell, right? But problem ये है कि farmer अब 400 किलो लेके कहाँ जाएगा? Right? He has to come to these mandis only. What they declared, it was an OTA, outside trade area. That means mandis में जिसको करना है कर ले. But every other area, apart from this mandi, is an outside trade area. If you want to sell your produce here, there is no license requirement from you. That means this was free trade that the farm laws tried to propagate. Of course, these laws had to be repealed. Now you don't have a national physical market. A unified physical market nahi hai, but we have a unified digital market, which is in the name of ENAM, which is called Electronic National Agricultural Market. And towards ENAM, what does the government do? The government gives a financial assistance of 75 lakh rupees per APMC, which is the committee which will manage trade in that specific area. Primarily for what? For essential hardware. Problem with ENAM biggest is quality assurance. That I may be placing this order from Punjab and I'm getting this order from, let's say, Maharashtra. How do I know that the picture which has been shown to me is actually of the quality which is going to be delivered to me? So quality assaying, quality ki rating, ye honi chahiye. Uske liye there is financial assistance that the government gives up to a tune of 75 lakh rupees per APMC. This has been mentioned. Then towards climate action, both of these yojanas, you should remember, both of these yojanas are primarily for promoting organic agriculture in the country. One is Paramparagat Krishi Vikas Yojana, PVKY. Then there is another Mission Organic Value Chain Development in the northeastern region. Both of them, you only have to remember, are for organic farming. Just remember the name, remember they are for organic farming, nothing more than that. Apart from this, there is, information is something that you should know, because economic survey mein tha. There is this index which is made by ICAR. This is called Composite Index for Agricultural Sustainability. It uses some 51 indicators, right, only to highlight how sustainable is agriculture going to be. The worst performing state in this case would be Rajasthan, right? You just have to look at this index. That's about it. Nothing more. Know the name of the index because this can be a question straight up in prelims. Ye mil jayega. This will be uploaded, so you don't have to really note it down, right? I'm guessing this would be uploaded. Okay. In allied sectors, two sectors have to be looked at. One is livestock, the other one is fisheries. In livestock, there has been an increase in the contribution to GVA, which surged from 24.38% in financial year 15 to 30.32% to 3% in financial year 23. I also showed you in the graph also, right? Amongst the livestock industry, the milk industry stands out because this is the major contribution in terms of value addition. Now, there is the related to milk industry, they mentioned a certain few initiatives. The primary one is Rashtriya Gokul Mission, right? मैंने लिख रखा है कि राष्ट्रीय गोकुल मिशन के अंदर क्या क्या होता है. There is something called multi-purpose AI technicians in rural India. Here AI is not artificial intelligence. Here AI is artificial insemination, right? ये confuse मत हो जाना. This is artificial insemination. There is rural health disease control programs. Just remember the names though. I have highlighted everything that you should at least look at multiple times. बस ये याद रखना कि AI is not artificial intelligence. This is artificial insemination because this is in context of livestock. फिशरीज में वी हैव दीज योजनास, दो तो याद ही रखनी होंगी, इनफैक्ट आई एम श्योर न्यूज़ में बहुत बारी आता है. प्रधानमंत्री मत्स्य संपदा योजना, मत्स्य संस्कृत फॉर फिशरीज, तो अगर आपके नाम आता है तो मत्स्य अगर पता होगा तो पता ही होगा ये फिशरीज के रिलेटेड है. दिस इज द ब्रॉडर स्कीम, द प्रधानमंत्री मत्स्य संपदा योजना. अंडर दिस यू हैव समथिंग कॉल्ड प्रधानमंत्री मत्स्य किसान समृद्धि सह योजना. बाप रे, it is essentially for formalization of finance, insurance, and value chain efficiency. Just remember the names though. You are also wanting to formalize. Why? Formalize kyun? Because that increases your chances of securing institutional credit. That is why you also want to formalize. Of course, the government also needs to know ki ban kitna raha hai, right? But a bigger pain point which has to be solved is institutional credit. The more formalized you are, banks are going to be more willing to lend to you. Fisheries and Aquaculture Infrastructure Development Fund. Just remember these names, please. I mean, there's not a lot that has to be gone in. These are numbers with respect to fish production, which has increased. And remember this is an export-led sector. India's seafood exports have increased, reflecting a growth of 29.7%, 30% almost increase हुआ है since financial year 20. Fisheries, I'm guessing this year, next year, kabhi na kabhi fisheries pe question aana hi hai in mains. Right? This has been a sector which has been in the eyes of the economic survey for the last 2 to 3 odd years. Har saal mention hota hai. This is a sector that you have to focus extra on. In terms of food processing, yeah, the food processing industry in India is one of the largest employers in the organized sector. These are data points you have to remember just. In the organized sector, the food processing industry is one of the largest. Roughly around 12% of employment is created by the food processing industry. Value of agricultural food exports, remember these are all food exports, was roughly around 11.7% of India's total exports. Amongst these agri-food exports, हमारे processed food exports कितने थे? They have risen from 14.9% to around 23. That means 1/3 of our food exports are processed food exports. What we have is Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sampada Yojana, which is basically about modernization of infrastructure, optimizing supply chains from the farm to the retail, helping processing industries. Remember, one problem for processing industries in the country is, एक तो simple सी बात है कि capex तो हम आप spend नहीं करते, that's going to be a problem. One bigger problem is also ECA, Essential Commodities Act. Under the Essential Commodities Act, supply limits can be put arbitrarily. That means if I am planning a big storage unit, कल को मेरे पे सरकार arbitrarily कभी भी लगा दे supply limit, तो मैं क्यों बनाऊं? Right? That's a big problem, big disincentive, which was also tried to be rectified through one of the farm laws. The third farm law was about amendment of the Essential Commodities Act. Of course, all three were repealed at the same point in time. That is also a big stumbling block for processing units in the country. These are just schemes. There is also a PLI scheme, Production Linked Incentive Scheme for food processing. Right? इनके लिए PLI scheme भी है. Then you have Pradhan Mantri Formalization of Micro Food Processing Enterprises. I'm sure this must be in the news recently. Formalization, remember why? Because the government, one, wants to capture data. Of course, that is going to be an implicit objective. But the explicit objective is going to be formalization of credit. A formal, you can say, sector or formal enterprise, higher chances of securing credit from institutional sources. Right? These are the major schemes that you have to remember, because they have been mentioned in the economic survey. Last is, I think, food management. Just told you about food management, started from PDS, right? PDS was turned into TPDS, pehle RPDS, RPDS to TPDS, from TPDS we went on to NFSA. The NFSA only gives us statutory backing to PDS. The PDS has gone nowhere. It is still public distribution system. The NFSA only gives it to statutory backing. Under the NFSA, 75% of rural, 50% of the urban population is covered. Now, they have only mentioned कौन-कौन सी schemes हैं हमारे पास. We have PDS, Public Distribution System, and TPDS, National Food Security Act, प्रधान मंत्री गरीब कल्याण अन्न योजना. Remember, food subsidy बढ़ी इसलिए भी. NFSA बोलता है that after every 3 years you can revise the prices of rice, wheat, and coarse grains. Upwards revision तो हुआ नहीं, but around the time of COVID, downwards revision ज़रूर हो गया, because over and above the entitlement that you are supposed to get 5 kgs per person per month, you are also getting additional entitlement at 0 rupees. That also added to your food subsidy burden. Center खरीद रहा है MSP पे, और भी cost लगते हैं, which is called the economic cost of food grains. पर जब eventually इसको retail करता है, वो बिक रहा है 3 रुपए, 2 रुपए, 1 रुपए per kilo पे, and certain cases में 0 पे, which is what continuously increases your food subsidy burden also. These are issues that you should know. Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana, which is basically over and above your TPDS entitlements under the NFSA, will be given to you for free. In addition, there is a commitment. This was first discontinued, and then it was later recontinued. Commitment to achieving 100% e-KYC compliance nationwide. What is this all about? A big problem of TPDS in the country is that identification of beneficiaries is done by the state government. That means your entitlement automatically gets linked to your domicile, right? You will have a ration card of Bihar. You will have a ration card in Jammu and Kashmir because the identification is done by these states. Now, as a migrant worker, when you move from Jammu and Kashmir to, let's say, Bangalore, your name is not there in the list. So what will you do? Your entitlements, you cannot procure it from Jammu and Kashmir because you're in Bangalore now. So what do you do is, right, you have to buy it from the market, right? And these are people who are spending a lot of their income on food produce only. And these are people who need this support. For them, we wanted to have a one nation, one ration card scheme. Now, one nation, one ration card scheme would mean that there would be efficiency problems, right? Because every state will have their own database. This database has to be connected, right? Now, this database has to be connected. One step in that direction is e-KYC compliance, which is to say, right, whether this person should get an entitlement in Bangalore or not, you have to first know ki iske naam ka, is he a priority household or not, right? Now, for that, what is going to be done is they will seed your Aadhaar number in your ration card. The seeding will be done in your home state, but the verification can be done in Bangalore itself. Now that you have the one nation, one ration card scheme, you can go and secure an entitlement in Bangalore also. The only thing is it has to be verified. The government wants to roll out 100% e-KYC compliance, which is to say, electronically, right, these ration shops should know whether you are complying, whether you are a beneficiary or not. Right, this is towards your ONORC, One Nation, One Ration Card scheme. Last is Credit Guarantee Scheme for Electronic Negotiable Warehouse Receipts. This has two objectives. One, it secures credit for farmers. The second objective here is that it prevents distress sales. Now, normally what happens is, if a farmer has excess produce, right, he will engage in distress sale because the produce is perishable. Under this scheme, what you can do is you can put your food grains or put your produce in these warehouses, certified warehouses. Against this storing your produce in these warehouses, they're going to give you a receipt. You can produce this receipt with the bank, and this receipt is going to serve as a collateral for you. Prevents two things. You did not have to sell it in distress. You could store it somewhere, and against that storage, you get a negotiable warehouse receipt. Against this receipt, you're going to get credit. So two things at the same point in time: institutional credit and also prevention of distress sale, right? Last few things. In fact, this is the last slide, which is about a dabba, which is there in the economic survey. This is about a sunrise industry, Indian horticulture. This is floriculture. Floriculture will be flowers primarily. मैंने कुछ data निकाल के तुम्हारे लिए रख लिया हुआ है. Firstly, which are the main markets? This is a highly export-driven sector. Which are your main markets? US, Netherlands, UAE, UK, Malaysia, Canada. More than 50% of India's floriculture units are only in Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, and Tamil Nadu, southern states. Other good performing states are MP and West Bengal. Total export of floriculture was 86.63 million. Remember, this is an export driven sector. Profitable avenues, it talks about cut flower production, loose flower production, kya profitable ho sakta hai, right? Going to be used for perfumes, essential oils, including Orbi benefits, and it's not just the exports. Other benefits are when you sequence rice with flowers, there is a productivity rise, right? Including flowers in rice-based crop sequences gives a higher return. This has been proven by studies. Intercropping flowers are more profitable compared to cereals pulses. That means when you are intercropping, you can say one crop with other crop, right? If you intercrop with flowers, it's going to be also giving you higher yields. Right, so this is only in terms of production, this is in terms of exports, the importance of this sector. Last is marginal and small land holdings. It's going to benefit them the most. Why? Because right now, 63% of area under cultivation, under floriculture, is with small and marginal farmers. And this is an export-driven sector. There are major export destinations. This is going to be India's sunrise industry. Sunrise ka matlab kya? Promising potential industry, right? This was only and only a status update. I hope it is clear to you. And I think I took far more time than I was supposed to. But if you have any questions, any queries, this is where you can reach me out, right? All right. Have a good day.